I am Thomas, 70 years old and somehow still healing from the wounds my own family inflicted. As a retired structural engineer, I spent my life building strong foundations, completely unaware that my own son was plotting a fatal collapse. 5 months after my wife died, I took her broken smart glasses in for a simple repair. The technician locked his shop doors, pulled me into a back room and whispered, "Check the will right now before you are next." I stood frozen, watching the terrifying video he recovered from her glasses, and in that dark room, my grief turned into a cold, calculated plan for revenge. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Now let me tell you how a simple errand uncovered a nightmare. For 40 years, I worked in Chicago building things meant to last. I understand stress fractures, load-bearing walls, and the invisible forces that cause a structure to collapse. I always believed my family was built on solid bedrock. I provided everything for my wife Martha and our son Derek. I paid for his Ivy League education, funded his lavish wedding to his wife Rachel, and stepped back to enjoy my retirement, trusting that my legacy was secure. 5 months ago, that foundation cracked. Martha passed away. The doctors called it a sudden and massive heart attack. It happened on a Tuesday evening while I was downtown at a charity board meeting. By the time I rushed back to our house, the paramedics were already shaking their heads. Derek and Rachel had been visiting her that evening. They told me she just collapsed, clutching her chest, and that it happened too fast for anyone to do anything. I accepted it. Death is the one structural failure no engineer can calculate or prevent. But Martha had been struggling before she died. She was in the early stages of memory loss. She would forget her keys, lose her way on her morning walks, and get frustrated with the fading reliability of her own mind. To help her maintain her independence, I bought her a pair of custom smart glasses. They looked like ordinary designer frames, but they had a discreet built-in camera. It was designed to record her daily routes and sync to a private cloud, so if she ever got lost, she could literally retrace her steps. The paramedics had handed me her personal items in a plastic bag that night. Her wedding ring, her watch, and those glasses. The right lens was cracked from where she hit the floor. I could not bring myself to look at them for months. The grief was too heavy, a suffocating weight that made me avoid anything that reminded me of her absence. Yesterday morning, I finally found the strength to open that plastic bag. I decided I wanted the glasses fixed to keep them as a memento. I drove to a small tech repair shop owned by Leo Mitchell. Leo is a brilliant kid, a software wizard I had known since he was a teenager. I helped pay for his college tuition when his own father walked out on him, and he always treated Martha and me like family. The bell above the door chimed as I walked into the dusty electronics-filled shop. Leo looked up from his workbench and smiled. I handed him the glasses and explained that I just wanted the cracked lens replaced and the internal memory wiped clean so I could safely store them away. I expected him to take them, give me a receipt, and tell me to come back tomorrow. Instead, the moment Leo recognized the specific serial number on the smart frames, his entire demeanor changed. The smile vanished from his face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. He looked past me, staring out the front window of the shop, as if checking to see if anyone had followed me. Without saying a single word, Leo walked past me, flipped the open sign to closed, pulled the heavy security blinds down over the glass, and turned the deadbolt. A loud, heavy click echoed in the quiet shop. "What is going on, Leo?" I asked, my voice tight with confusion. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me toward the back room where he kept his secure servers. He shut the door behind us, plunging the small room into shadows, illuminated only by the glow of his computer monitors. He looked at me, his hands physically trembling as he held Martha's glasses. "Mr. Caldwell," he whispered, his voice shaking, "you need to check your wife's will right now before you are next." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "Before I am next," I asked, "what does that mean? What are you talking about?" Leo did not answer. He sat down at his terminal, plugged a specialized decryption cable into the hidden port on the glasses, and began typing furiously. He explained that a few weeks after Martha died, he had run a routine diagnostic sweep on his cloud servers, the servers that hosted the backup data for her glasses. He had noticed a massive anomaly. A huge file corruption occurred right around the exact time of her death. Someone had tried to remotely wipe the glasses and the cloud backup simultaneously, but they were sloppy. They did not know Leo had built a shadow directory into the hardware for emergency recovery. I froze as he hit the enter key. A progress bar flashed on the screen, piecing together shattered fragments of data. I managed to reconstruct the raw video file from the physical memory cache inside the frames. Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. I did not know what to do. I have been terrified to call you. I did not know who to trust. Just watch. The screen flickered to life. It was a first-person perspective recorded directly from the camera resting on the bridge of Martha's nose. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the exact date and time of her death. The video was shaky, but the resolution was clear. I was looking through my dead wife's eyes. She was in our kitchen. I saw her hands frail and trembling, reaching out toward the marble countertop. I heard her breath, ragged and shallow, struggling to pull air into her lungs. It was the terrifying sound of a woman experiencing acute heart failure. The camera angle shifted violently downward as Martha collapsed to the hardwood floor. The impact cracked the lens, leaving a jagged spiderweb fracture across the left side of the screen. Through that fractured view, 2 pairs of shoes stepped into the frame. Expensive polished Italian leather loafers, and a pair of designer heels. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. Standing directly over my dying wife were my son Derek and his wife Rachel. They were not panicking. They were not reaching for their phones to call for an ambulance. They were not kneeling down to help her. They were just standing there, looking down at her with an absolute terrifying calmness. Martha let out a desperate, wheezing gasp. Her hand reached up weakly, pointing toward the counter. Her voice was faint, agonizing to listen to. The medicine, she whispered. My pills. Rachel stepped forward. Her pristine, manicured hand reached out and picked up the small orange prescription bottle of Martha's emergency heart medication from the counter. I watched, paralyzed by a sickening horror, as Rachel unscrewed the cap, looked down at my gasping wife, and simply turned away, keeping the pills completely out of reach. Derek crouched down. His face filled the camera's view. My own son, the boy I had raised and protected, looking into his dying mother's eyes with a cold, empty stare. He leaned in close. His lips parted as if he was about to speak. But before he could say a word, the video violently stuttered. The image scrambled into a chaotic mess of digital noise and static, and the screen went completely black. I stood there in the dark room, my lungs burning. I had stopped breathing. The silence in the repair shop was deafening, broken only by the hum of the computer servers. It cuts out right there, Leo whispered, breaking the silence. The impact from the fall damaged the internal drive, and whoever tried to wipe the data corrupted the audio and the final seconds. The encryption is incredibly deep. I have been running algorithms for weeks, but I need more time to recover the rest of the file and clean up the audio so we can hear exactly what he said. My mind was a chaotic storm. The structural integrity of my entire reality had just been obliterated. My wife did not just die of a heart attack. She was murdered. Murdered by our own son and his wife. They stood there and watched her suffocate deliberately, withholding the medication that would have saved her life. And now they were pretending to mourn her. Why, I thought, my fists clenching so hard my knuckles turned white. Why would they do this? Check the will, Leo had said. Before you are next. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the tension in the room. I jumped, pulling it from my pocket. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim light. It was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen. The name of the man who had stood over my dying wife. My thumb hovered over the accept button. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the violent rage down into a cold, locked box inside my mind. I answered the call and brought the phone to my ear. Hey, Dad! Derek's voice echoed through the speaker. It was sickeningly sweet, laced with that fake, practiced warmth he used with his clients. Rachel and I are coming over to the house right now. We need to pick you up and take you to the lawyer to sign those power of attorney papers. Your memory is getting worse lately, Dad. You need us to step in and handle everything for you. See you in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could say a word. I lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with terrifying clarity. My son had killed his mother, and now he was coming for me. I slipped the phone into my pocket. The cold metal grounded me against the storm raging in my chest. I looked at Leo. The young man was pale, his eyes wide with fear. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder, letting him know I was in absolute control. Keep working on decrypting the rest of that audio file, I told him, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Back up everything to a secure offline drive, and do not answer your phone for anyone but me. I will handle my son. I stepped out of the repair shop and into the brisk autumn air. I had exactly 15 minutes before they arrived. As a structural engineer, I had spent my entire 40-year career evaluating immense physical loads, calculating exactly how much relentless pressure a solid steel support beam could take before it finally snapped. I had to apply that exact same cold, unforgiving mathematics to my own mind right now. I could not let the crushing grief or the blinding fury show. I had to become the very thing they truly believed I was. A weak, confused, deeply grieving old man whose mind was steadily slipping away into the fog. I let my shoulders slump forward, completely altering my posture. I purposely slowed my breathing, making it shallow and slightly labored. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting a vacant, lost expression settle heavily over my features. Right on time, a sleek black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. The heavily tinted passenger window rolled down, revealing Derek in the driver's seat, gripping the hand-stitched leather steering wheel. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the wildly successful investment banker he portrayed to the world. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, turning to give me a bright, flawlessly practiced smile that made my stomach physically churn with absolute disgust. "Oh, Dad, we were so terribly worried about you," Rachel cooed quickly, opening her heavy car door and stepping out onto the pavement to gently help me inside. "Why are you walking around this busy part of town all by yourself? You know you get easily disoriented these days." I let my hands tremble slightly as I reached out to take her offered arm. "I was just getting your mother's glasses fixed," I mumbled deliberately, slurring my words just a fraction to properly sell the performance. "I thought maybe she would want them back." Rachel exchanged a quick, highly revealing look with Derek. A look that clearly screamed, "The old man is rapidly losing his mind." She gently guided me into the spacious back seat, treating me like a fragile piece of antique glass that was already cracking under the immense pressure. Derek pulled the massive SUV away from the curb, seamlessly merging into the heavy afternoon traffic. He adjusted his rearview mirror just enough so he could make direct eye contact with me while he drove. He had always been a remarkably smooth talker, an absolute master at selling highly toxic financial assets to wealthy clients who simply did not know any better. Now he was ruthlessly applying those exact same boardroom manipulation tactics to his own father. "Dad, we really need to sit down and talk seriously about the future." Derek began, his tone dripping with manufactured concern. "I was reviewing the estate documents this morning with the legal team. Mom's final medical bills are incredibly complicated. The hospital is sending massive invoices that do not make any sense, and the insurance company is giving us the runaround. It is rapidly becoming a massive administrative headache for everyone involved." I stared aimlessly out the tinted window, carefully keeping my expression entirely blank and unresponsive. "Bills," I whispered, sounding incredibly distant and thoroughly confused. "I can just write a check, Derek. We have plenty of money in the accounts. We do not need to worry about paying medical bills." "That is exactly the root of the problem," Dad Derek said smoothly, casually tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. "You have $40 million sitting in various trust accounts, real estate properties, and liquid assets. It is a massive, highly complex portfolio. But without Mom here to legally co-manage things, the imminent tax liabilities are going to be absolutely disastrous. And honestly, Dad, Rachel, and I are getting deeply worried about you living all alone in that big house. Worried about me, I asked, letting a pathetic note of feeble confusion perfectly enter my fragile voice. Rachel turned around completely in her seat, resting her perfectly manicured hand affectionately on my knee. "Yes, Thomas," she said softly. Her voice was like smooth velvet draped over shattered glass. "You have not been yourself since Martha passed away. You are constantly forgetting things. You wander off without telling anyone. The intense grief is taking a terrible, visible toll on your cognitive health. We just want to protect you. There are so many ruthless scammers out there who specifically prey on vulnerable seniors with large unprotected estates. We simply cannot bear the thought of someone taking advantage of you when you are this fragile." The breathtaking hypocrisy of her empty words almost made me completely break character. They were the ruthless scammers. They were the absolute predators hiding in this vehicle. But I simply nodded slowly, looking down at my visibly trembling hands. "What do you want me to do?" I asked quietly, perfectly playing the tragic role of the defeated victim. "It is very simple," Dad Derek replied instantly, his voice brightening with a wave of false relief. "We are heading to the lawyer's office right now to have you sign a comprehensive power of attorney document. It just gives me the legal authority to seamlessly handle all the complex financial matters properly, manage the various trusts, and deal with the endless hospital billing departments. You will not have to worry about a single difficult thing ever again. You can just rest peacefully at home and focus entirely on your physical health. We will carry the heavy burden for you." It was a brilliantly constructed, absolutely flawless lie. To any outside observer, they would look exactly like the perfect, deeply devoted family, gracefully stepping up to lovingly care for an ailing, grieving patriarch. But I knew exactly what that binding legal document truly was. It was a blank check. The very moment my signature hit that specific piece of paper, Derek would immediately have unrestricted, unquestioned access to legally liquidate every single financial asset I proudly owned. Rachel reached down to the floorboard and quickly produced a sleek silver thermos. She carefully unscrewed the top, letting a thick cloud of highly aromatic steam fill the enclosed climate-controlled cabin of the luxury vehicle. "Here, Thomas," she murmured affectionately, gracefully leaning over the center console to specifically hand me a small, insulated travel cup. "I made your special homemade herbal tea right before we left the house today. It is the exact same soothing recipe I used to make for Martha whenever she was feeling completely overwhelmed and deeply anxious. It will deeply help calm your frayed nerves and quickly clear away that nasty mental confusion you have been fiercely dealing with lately. Drink it all up right now while it is still nice and hot." I carefully took the warm cup from her perfectly steady hand. My own fingers were actively shaking, and for once the violent physical tremor was absolutely not an act. It was pure, unadulterated, sickening revulsion. I stared directly down at the dark, earthy liquid, rapidly swirling inside the small metallic cup. The highly fragrant scent of strong chamomile and fresh mint poorly masked something else darkly lurking right beneath the warm surface. Something subtle, unnervingly heavy, and distinctly metallic. "You should really drink it, Dad," Derek firmly urged without taking his calculating eyes off the busy road ahead. "Rachel spent all morning carefully preparing it just for you. It really helps incredibly with your cognitive stability. You know you desperately need it right now." I slowly brought the thin rim of the hot cup to my dry lips, entirely, pretending to take a slow, highly hesitant sip, but I kept my mouth tightly and securely sealed shut. As Derek aggressively navigated a sharp, unexpected turn through the incredibly busy downtown intersection, he cursed loudly at a passing commercial delivery truck, becoming completely and totally distracted by the heavy, shifting traffic. Seizing the perfect, fleeting moment, I deliberately and forcefully jolted my right wrist. A generous, heavy splash of the scalding hot herbal tea spilled directly over the edge of the travel cup and landed squarely onto the heavy-duty synthetic floor mat, strategically positioned right beneath my expensive leather shoes. I immediately looked down at the dark, steaming puddle. Almost instantly, a faint, undeniable chemical sizzle echoed softly in the quiet, enclosed footwell of the luxury vehicle. The highly resilient synthetic rubber of the expensive protective mat began to severely and visibly discolor rapidly, turning a sickly, deeply pale yellow exactly where the toxic liquid had directly pooled. The horrifying, undeniable realization violently struck me like a massive physical blow directly to the chest. My beautiful, fiercely intelligent wife did not suddenly die of natural, completely unavoidable causes. Her fatal, sudden heart attack was directly preceded by 5 agonizing months of extreme neurological decline, severe, unexplainable joint pain, and profound, crippling mental fog. Physical symptoms that perfectly mirrored exactly what I had been actively experiencing for the past 5 consecutive months. Symptoms they conveniently and repeatedly blamed on my advancing old age and my intense, blinding grief. I was absolutely not losing my sharp, analytical mind. I was absolutely not dying of a broken heart. I was being meticulously, deliberately, and systematically poisoned by them. The rest of the car ride passed in a suffocating blur. I kept my breathing shallow, my mind running complex structural calculations to stop my hands from reaching across the center console and wrapping around my son's throat. They were murdering me, slowly, methodically, just like Martha. Every sip of that bitter tea, every gentle touch on my shoulder, was a calculated step in my own execution. Derek steered the heavy vehicle into a dilapidated commercial plaza on the edge of the financial district. I looked up at the squat, weathered brick structure sandwiched between a failing dry cleaner and a discount liquor store. The faded gold lettering on the glass door read, "Maxwell and Associates Legal Counsel." This was absolutely not the pristine downtown high-rise where my trusted estate attorney Gregory Barnes operated. Gregory had managed my family trust for 3 decades. He was a shark in a tailored suit who scrutinized every single comma. Derek knew Gregory would never allow a transfer of power without a brutal interrogation. So my son bypassed the family lawyer and found a bottom-feeding opportunist for a quick fee. I stumbled slightly as I got out, leaning heavily on the doorframe. Rachel was instantly at my side, gripping my elbow. We walked into a cramped reception area smelling of stale coffee. A man in a poorly fitted gray suit waited behind a cluttered desk, offering a slick, greasy smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," the lawyer said, extending a clammy hand. "I am Richard Maxwell. Derek has told me so much about you. We just have a few standard documents to execute today to relieve your heavy administrative burdens." I nodded slowly, offering a trembling handshake. They guided me into a small conference room. Derek pulled out a chair, pressing his hands firmly onto my shoulders as I sat down. Maxwell slid a thick stack of stapled documents across the scarred wooden table. "This is a durable power of attorney," Maxwell explained, tapping a cheap plastic pen against the signature line. "It grants your son the immediate legal authority to consolidate your bank accounts, liquidate stock assets, and manage all ongoing medical or tax liabilities. Given your declining health, this ensures your vast estate remains fully protected." I stared down at the dense legal jargon. It was an absolute death warrant. The second I signed my name, Derek could digitally wire my entire $40 million life savings to any offshore account he desired. He could drain my retirement, leaving me destitute before the poison finished its grim work. I reached out with a trembling hand, allowing my fingers to hover uncertainly over the pen. Derek leaned in close, his breathing shallow with suppressed anticipation. "Just sign right there at the bottom, Dad," he urged softly. "Right next to the blue sticker." I picked up the pen. The tip touched the paper, and then I let out a violent rattling cough. I doubled over in the chair, hacking uncontrollably, pressing my forearm against my mouth. I let the pen slip from my fingers, watching it clatter onto the floor. Rachel quickly handed me a paper napkin, her face a mask of manufactured concern. I wheezed heavily, playing the role of a deeply exhausted, fading old man, perfectly to the hilt. I am so sorry, I whispered, rubbing my chest. My chest is just so tight today. I looked down at the documents, narrowing my eyes as if the text was blurry. Derek, I cannot read a single word of this. I must have left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter back home. Maxwell frowned, looking nervously at my son. You do not strictly need to read the fine print, Mr. Caldwell. I have fully summarized the broad strokes for you. It is entirely standard boilerplate text. I shook my head stubbornly, pushing the thick stack of papers away with a clumsy motion. No. I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. Martha always told me never to sign anything I could not read with my own two eyes. I will take these home with me. I will read them over the long weekend when my head is clearer. We can come back next week. The sudden deafening silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked up, letting my vacant gaze wander over to my son. Derek was staring directly at me, and for one terrifying fraction of a second, his carefully crafted mask completely slipped. The veins in his neck bulged, his jaw clenched with such pure, unadulterated rage that I could actually hear his teeth grinding together. He looked at me like a trapped animal, actively ruining a highly lucrative slaughter. He wanted to physically grab my hand and force the pen across the paper. Dad. Derek started, his voice tight and dangerously low. We really need to get this finalized today. The tax deadlines are aggressively approaching. Before he could snap, Rachel stepped smoothly in front of him, placing a restraining hand firmly on his chest. She flashed me that sickening, patient smile entirely devoid of actual warmth. Of course, Thomas, Rachel cooed gently, gathering the papers and sliding them neatly into a manila folder. You should absolutely take your time. There is no rush at all. We want you to feel completely comfortable with everything. Derek is just a little stressed about the looming hospital bills, that is all. Derek swallowed his visible fury, forcing a stiff, awkward nod. Yeah. Right. Sorry, Dad. Take the weekend. We will review it all together on Monday. They drove me back to my sprawling, empty house in near total silence. The tension radiating from the front seats was absolutely palpable. I clutched the manila folder tightly to my chest, a physical shield against their quiet, deadly desperation. Every passing mile confirmed my grim reality. The clock was ticking. They needed this money immediately, and my stubborn refusal to sign had just massively accelerated their lethal timeline. When we finally pulled into my long, sweeping driveway, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to me with an unwavering, deeply concerning smile. Thomas, I am actually going to stay the night in the guest room here, she announced smoothly. You had such a terrible coughing fit in that office, and you seem so incredibly frail today. I really want to cook you a hot, nutritious dinner and make absolutely sure you are properly cared for tonight. I would never forgive myself if you fell or had a sudden medical emergency while you were all alone. My stomach twisted violently. She was not staying to care for me. She was staying to monitor me. She was staying to ensure I ingested my daily lethal dose of whatever toxic cocktail she was slowly feeding me. That is very kind of you, Rachel, I whispered weakly, letting her help me out of the SUV. Later that evening, after a quiet, heavily supervised dinner, I retreated to my private study. I sat in my large leather armchair, staring blankly at the dark mahogany desk. Rachel knocked softly and entered carrying a small silver tray. On it rested a steaming mug of her special herbal tea and a small, unmarked white pill. Derek spoke to your doctor this afternoon, Thomas. She lied effortlessly, handing me the pill. He prescribed a new, highly concentrated vitamin supplement to help strengthen your heart and clear up that nasty brain fog. You need to swallow it right now and drink every last drop of your tea so you can get a long, deep sleep. I looked at the pill resting in my palm. It was completely smooth, devoid of any pharmaceutical markings. A silent, untraceable weapon. I gave her a weak, grateful nod, bringing my hand to my mouth. I tossed the pill backward, but expertly tucked it deep under my tongue. I picked up a glass of water from the desk and took a large, convincing swallow. There I said, managing a tired, raspy sigh. All gone. Rachel smiled, her eyes tracking the mug of steaming tea. "Drink up," she urged softly. "I will be right outside in the hallway if you need absolutely anything at all." She turned her back and slowly walked out of the study, pulling the heavy wooden door partially shut, leaving a small crack so she could listen. The moment her footsteps faded slightly down the hall, I acted with swift, silent precision. I spit the dissolved bitter pill into a thick paper napkin and shoved it deep into my trouser pocket. I grabbed the hot mug of toxic tea and moved quietly across the thick Persian rug toward the door. Just outside the study, sitting elegantly in the long, shadowed corridor, was a massive decorative potted fern. I leaned carefully through the small gap in the doorway, ensuring Rachel was completely out of sight in the distant kitchen. With a steady, deliberate motion, I poured the entire contents of the steaming mug directly into the deep soil of the large potted fern. The dark liquid quickly vanished into the dirt. I carefully wiped the rim of the ceramic mug, walked slowly back to my desk, and sat down in the absolute silence, now fully prepared to wage a devastating war. I opened my eyes to the pale morning light, filtering through the heavy bedroom curtains. For the first time in 5 agonizing months, the world around me did not spin into a dizzying, nauseating blur the moment I lifted my head from the pillow. I lay perfectly still on the mattress, taking a slow, deep breath, mentally inventorying every single joint and muscle in my aging body. The persistent crippling ache in my knees, the heavy stiffness in my shoulders, and that suffocating mental fog that had relentlessly clouded my daily thoughts were noticeably receding. It was not a complete miraculous recovery, but the sudden absence of that oppressive physical weight was absolutely undeniable. Skipping just one single dose of Rachel's special homemade herbal tea had been enough to grant my body a desperate moment of genuine clarity. I slowly sat up on the edge of the bed, planting my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. My legs did not violently tremble. My hands, when I held them out in front of me, were completely steady. The horrifying reality of my situation washed over me again, cold and sharp. Everything I had been feeling, the weakness, the confusion, the sudden inability to remember simple daily tasks. It was all a meticulously engineered illusion. They were intentionally breaking down my physical structure, dismantling my health day by day, microgram by microgram, ensuring that my inevitable collapse would look like nothing more than the tragic, natural decline of a grieving, heartbroken old man. They had done the exact same thing to Martha. They had watched her slowly fade, offering fake smiles and poisoned cups of tea until her heart finally gave out. I stood up, my spine straightening with a renewed dangerous sense of purpose. I dressed quietly, choosing a simple pair of slacks and a comfortable sweater, maintaining the visual illusion of a vulnerable, defeated senior citizen. I opened my bedroom door and stepped out into the long, quiet hallway, leading toward the main living area. The house was silent save for the faint, muffled sounds of conversation drifting up from the kitchen downstairs. As I walked down the corridor, I paused right outside the door of my private study. My eyes fell on the massive, decorative potted fern sitting in the corner. Just last night, it had been a vibrant, thriving plant with bright green fronds reaching up toward the ceiling. Now it was a terrifying monument to my son's absolute treachery. The entire plant was completely dead. The lush, healthy leaves had withered into dry, brittle husks. The stems were violently blackened, curled inward, as if they had been scorched by an invisible chemical fire. The rich, dark soil at the base of the heavy ceramic pot was stained a sickly, unnatural yellowish hue where I had poured the steaming contents of Rachel's mug. The sheer concentrated toxicity required to annihilate a resilient, fully grown plant in a matter of mere hours was utterly staggering. If I had swallowed that pill and drank that tea last night, I might not have woken up this morning. I might have been another tragic, sudden heart attack, another convenient tragedy for Derek and Rachel to tearfully mourn at an expensive, catered funeral. I stared at the blackened, dead leaves, feeling a cold, hollow void where my paternal love used to reside. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the son I had proudly watched graduate, he simply did not exist anymore. He had been entirely replaced by a ruthless, greedy predator, and I was going to treat him exactly as such. I continued down the wide staircase, carefully gripping the wooden banister and deliberately slowing my steps to mimic a heavy, exhausted shuffle. I entered the bright, sunlit kitchen. Derek was sitting at the marble island, aggressively typing on his sleek laptop, dressed in a sharp navy suit. His expensive leather briefcase rested on the counter right next to him. Rachel was standing by the stove, cheerfully stirring a pot of oatmeal, humming a soft, pleasant melody, as if she had not just attempted to quietly murder her father-in-law 12 hours ago. "Good morning, Thomas," Rachel chirped, turning around with a blinding, practiced smile. "Did you sleep well? I was listening for you, but the house was so perfectly quiet. You must have been completely exhausted." I offered her a weak, entirely vacant nod. "I slept very deeply, Rachel," I murmured, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "That herbal tea you made me worked absolute wonders. I feel like I barely moved a muscle all night long." Rachel exchanged a very quick, highly satisfied glance with Derek. Derek looked up from his bright screen, offering me a stiff, completely unsympathetic smile. "Glad to hear it, Dad. We really need you resting and gathering your strength. We still have to go back to the lawyer's office on Monday to get those documents finalized. The administrative delays are getting really frustrating." Before I could formulate a pathetic, compliant response, Derek's cell phone suddenly began to buzz aggressively against the marble countertop. He glanced down at the glowing screen, and his confident, arrogant posture instantly vanished. His face went completely pale, a sheer, unadulterated panic flashing wildly in his eyes. He snatched the phone up as if it were burning his skin. "I have to take this right now," Derek stammered, his voice tight and unnaturally strained. He pushed his chair back violently, practically sprinting toward the glass patio doors leading out to the backyard. Rachel watched the stove. He stepped outside, sliding the heavy glass door tightly shut behind him, pacing frantically across the wooden deck as he pressed the phone to his ear. Rachel frowned, clearly annoyed by his sudden, chaotic departure, and turned her attention back to the bubbling oatmeal on the hot stove. "Oh goodness, we are completely out of the almond milk. You like, Thomas," she sighed with exaggerated frustration. "Let me run down to the basement pantry and grab a fresh carton. I will be right back. Do not touch the hot stove." She wiped her hands on a towel and quickly headed toward the basement stairs. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me completely alone in the spacious kitchen. I looked out the glass doors. Derek was pacing furiously by the edge of the swimming pool, aggressively running his free hand through his perfectly styled hair, his face twisted in desperate, frantic conversation. He was completely distracted, utterly consumed by whatever disaster was unfolding on the other end of that phone line. I turned my gaze back to the kitchen counter. Derek's expensive combination-locked leather briefcase was sitting right there, completely unguarded. My engineering background had required me to understand the intricate mechanical vulnerabilities of countless physical security systems. A standard 3-digit combination lock on a consumer-grade leather briefcase was incredibly elementary. It was a simple mechanism that relied on tiny internal tension pins. I moved with swift, silent precision, dropping the frail old man facade instantly. I stepped up to the counter and reached into my pocket, pulling out a small, sturdy metal paperclip I always carried. I quickly unbent the thick wire, creating a rigid makeshift tension tool. I slid the metal tip straight into the tiny gap beside the first numbered dial, applying firm, even pressure to the internal latch. I slowly rotated the dial with my thumb, feeling for the microscopic mechanical click that indicated the internal pin had aligned with the open groove. Click. I moved to the second dial, repeating the delicate, precise process. Click. The third dial rotated smoothly, dropping right into place with a final, satisfying snap. I pushed the brass release buttons and the heavy leather flap of the briefcase popped open. I did not waste a single second. I bypassed the shiny marketing brochures, the thick financial portfolios, and the expensive pens, digging straight into the back compartment. My fingers brushed against a thick, heavy stack of high-quality legal paper, bound by a stark blue cover. I pulled it out and quickly scanned the bold, capitalized text printed across the front page. It was a highly modified, legally notarized copy of Martha Caldwell's irrevocable trust agreement. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. This was the master document, the absolute financial core of my entire $40 million estate. Gregory Barnes, my actual attorney, held the original copies securely in his firm's vault. Derek had clearly hired this new sleazy downtown lawyer to draft a series of aggressive, highly illegal amendments to the trust structure, entirely bypassing the established legal protections I had put in place decades ago. I rapidly flipped through the dense, heavy pages, scanning the complex legal jargon with the trained, meticulous eye of a man who had spent 40 years reading dense structural blueprints. I bypassed the standard asset distribution clauses and the real estate holdings, searching specifically for the newly added amendments. I found it near the very back of the massive document. A brand new, heavily highlighted section that had absolutely no business being there. It was clearly marked as Section 4B, Contingency of Spousal Survivorship. I dragged my finger down the page, reading the freshly printed text. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. The carefully constructed legal wording was undeniably clear, ruthlessly designed to strip away every single protective barrier my estate possessed. I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto the final devastating sentence of Section 4B. I stared down at the crisp white paper, my eyes tracing the heavy black ink of Section 4B. The dense legal terminology masked a brutally clear survivorship contingency twisted to serve a greedy purpose. Our trust mandated that I retain control of the $40 million estate, with the remainder going to medical charities. But Derek had gutted our legacy. Section 4B stated that if I died within 6 months of Martha, the charity donations would be completely voided. The entire $40 million estate would transfer 100% directly to Derek. He knew a power of attorney could be legally challenged. He wanted permanent, unquestionable legal ownership. He needed me completely gone. I kept my hands steady against the cold granite edge of the kitchen island. I raised my eyes, looking past the modern stainless steel appliances toward the large digital calendar displayed on the wall oven panel. My mind, trained for decades to calculate precise structural loads, instantly ran the horrifying mathematics of my impending death. Martha had passed away 5 months and 2 weeks ago. The 6-month anniversary of her murder was exactly 14 days away. A wave of freezing clarity washed over me, erasing any traces of paternal denial. This was not a vague, open-ended scheme to slowly drain my accounts. This was a highly calculated, meticulously scheduled execution. Derek and Rachel were operating on a strict, unforgiving timeline. Every cup of that bitter herbal tea, every unmarked vitamin pill they shoved into my hand was perfectly dosed to ensure my body suffered a massive, catastrophic failure before that 2-week deadline expired. They needed my heart to stop before the middle of April. If I managed to survive past that 6-month mark, the original charitable clauses of the trust would permanently lock into place forever, severing Derek from the massive $40 million windfall he so desperately needed to cover his illegal offshore debts. They were watching the clock, waiting for the heavy thallium toxins to build up in my bloodstream, eagerly anticipating the moment I would finally collapse onto the hardwood floor, just like his mother did. I took a slow, deep breath, sealing my profound, blinding rage behind a thick wall of unbreakable mental discipline. I had 14 days to turn their lethal trap back onto them. 14 days to systematically dismantle my son's entire life. Suddenly, the heavy glass of the patio door rattled violently in its metal track. Heavy footsteps pounded aggressively against the wooden deck outside. Derek was coming back. His phone conversation had ended abruptly, and his silhouette was moving fast toward the kitchen entrance. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had less than 2 seconds to secure the evidence. I quickly shoved the heavy legal document back into the hidden rear compartment of the leather briefcase. I folded the marketing brochures back over the top perfectly, recreating the messy, unorganized arrangement Derek had left behind. With a swift, precise motion, I pressed the heavy leather flap down. The brass latches snapped shut with a loud, distinct click just as the glass door slid violently open. Derek stepped into the kitchen, his face flushed, and his expensive tie loosened around his neck. He practically threw his cell phone onto the dining table, radiating a highly volatile, nervous energy. His sharp eyes immediately snapped toward the kitchen island. He stopped dead in his tracks. I was standing far too close to his briefcase. My hand was hovering just inches above the polished brass locks. The tension in the room instantly spiked. The air grew incredibly thick and suffocating. Derek's posture shifted, his shoulders tensing, as he took a slow, highly calculated step toward me. The mask of the loving, concerned son completely evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a predator protecting its vital secrets. "What are you doing?" Derek demanded. His voice was completely devoid of any warmth, flat and dangerously quiet. "Why are you hovering over my bag?" I did not flinch. I did not step back. I relied on 40 years of sitting across from aggressive, hostile contractors. I let my shoulders instantly sag, allowing a soft, vacant expression to quickly wash over my face. I brought my hand up to my forehead, rubbing my temples, as if I was deeply, profoundly confused. "I was just looking for the sugar bowl, Derek," I mumbled, slurring my words slightly, making my voice sound incredibly weak and thoroughly lost. "I wanted to put some sugar in my tea. Your wife made me a nice cup of tea, but it is just so awfully bitter today. I cannot seem to remember where Martha keeps the sugar bowl anymore. Everything in this kitchen just seems to move around on me." Derek stared at me with intense, piercing scrutiny. He analyzed every single line on my face, searching for any subtle crack in my performance. He looked down at the locked briefcase, then back up at my trembling hands. I offered him a pathetic, helpless smile, blinking slowly, as if the bright kitchen lights were hurting my tired eyes. Slowly, the aggressive tension drained from his rigid posture. He bought the lie. He genuinely believed he was looking at a broken, rapidly declining old man whose brain was rotting away from grief and age. "The sugar is in the pantry, Dad," Derek said, his voice returning to that sickeningly sweet, patronizing tone. "It is right where it has always been. Why don't you go sit down in the living room? You look incredibly exhausted. I will have Rachel bring it out to you." I nodded weakly, shuffling my feet across the polished tile floor, moving with painful, exaggerated slowness toward the hallway. I kept my head down, playing the tragic role of the defeated patriarch to absolute perfection. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, the basement door swung open. Rachel stepped back into the room, holding a fresh carton of almond milk. She looked at Derek, sensing the lingering heavy tension in the air. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I paused just beyond the archway, completely out of their line of sight, but close enough to hear their hushed, secretive voices. "He was wandering around the island, looking for sugar," Derek muttered, letting out a heavy, deeply frustrated sigh. "His mind is completely gone, Rachel. He doesn't even know where he is half the time. But we are running out of time. That phone call from my boss was extremely bad. They are demanding their money by the end of the month, or they are coming for me. We cannot afford to wait for his heart to just slowly give out on its own." I heard the soft rustle of clothing as Rachel stepped closer to her husband. I know she whispered back, her voice utterly devoid of any human empathy. "The tea is working, but he has always been stubbornly strong. I will fix it. When I make his dinner tonight, we need to completely double the dose. We will significantly up his daily dosage, and this whole miserable problem will be completely over by the weekend." I held my breath in the shadowed hallway, pressing my back flat against the cool plaster of the wall. Derek and Rachel continued their hushed, venomous conversation in the kitchen, completely unaware their execution timeline had just been abruptly exposed. I waited until the sound of Derek's leather shoes moved toward the front door, followed closely by the clicking of Rachel's heels. I heard the rustle of coats being grabbed, and then the heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt engaged automatically, locking me inside. I was finally alone in the deafening silence of the home I had built. I stepped out of the deep shadows and walked directly to my private study. I retrieved the crumpled paper napkin from my pocket. Inside, the dissolved white pill had dried into a thick, chalky residue. Next, I walked to the devastated potted fern. I reached into the blackened foliage, snapped off several dead stems, and scooped up a handful of the yellowed soil. I placed the toxic plant matter into a sealed plastic bag alongside the napkin. My hands were perfectly steady now. The trembling weakness was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical precision. I was no longer a grieving widower. I was an engineer investigating a catastrophic failure. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I drove my modest sedan straight past the towering downtown hospitals. I needed absolute discretion. As a structural engineer, I spent my entire life dissecting catastrophic material failures, isolating the exact point where a solid beam surrendered to pressure. Now I was applying that exact same clinical methodology to my own bloodline. I navigated the vehicle toward a sleek, unmarked glass building tucked away in the affluent northern suburbs. It was a high-end private analytical laboratory that specifically catered to elite corporate clients, conducting independent chemical testing for industrial lawsuits. I walked into the pristine, sterile lobby and approached the front desk. I did not offer my name or any personal medical history. I placed the sealed bag onto the white counter and requested an immediate toxicological screening. The receptionist blinked, citing standard processing times of 3 to 5 business days. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a figure that was exactly 4 times their standard expedited fee. I told her I needed a granular molecular breakdown of every chemical compound present in both the pill residue and the soil before the sun went down today. Money removes bureaucratic friction. The receptionist called for a senior chemist, who took the samples with a serious nod. I sat in the silent waiting room for 3 agonizing hours, mentally calculating the exact trajectory of my son's magnificent deception. Finally, the heavy glass door to the secure inner laboratory clicked open. A senior analytical chemist, a man in his late 50s with incredibly tired eyes and a crisp white coat, quietly gestured for me to follow him into his office. He closed the solid door securely, making sure the electronic lock engaged with a sharp click. He sat heavily behind his modern desk and slid a thick, freshly printed diagnostic report across the smooth glass surface. The detailed paperwork was filled with complex chemical spectrum graphs and severe warning markers indicating extreme toxicity. "You requested a full molecular breakdown." The chemist began, his voice tight with professional concern. The white residue in the napkin is a highly concentrated, unregulated synthetic sedative. It is a powerful central nervous system depressant designed to cause extreme lethargy, severe cognitive confusion, and deep physical weakness. It perfectly mimics the natural symptoms of advanced dementia or rapid neurological decline in elderly patients. I nodded slowly, my jaw clenched tight, and the soil sample I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The chemist took a deep breath, looking at me with a mixture of profound pity and absolute alarm. "The soil is completely saturated with a heavy metal compound known as thallium," he stated grimly. "It is tasteless, completely odorless, and incredibly lethal, even in microscopic doses. Historically, it is darkly known as the poisoner's poison, because it is nearly impossible to detect in a standard blood panel without ordering a specific, highly targeted screening. It aggressively attacks the central nervous system and cardiovascular muscles. Over time, a slow accumulation of thallium will cause severe joint pain, profound mental fog, and eventually, a sudden, utterly catastrophic cardiac arrest. It leaves almost no visible trace during a standard hospital autopsy. The victim simply appears to have suffered a fatal heart attack." The quiet, sterile walls of the laboratory seemed to close in around me as the horrific, unvarnished truth finally settled deep into my bones. The puzzle was complete. Every single agonizing symptom I had experienced over the last 5 months, the debilitating exhaustion, the terrifying memory lapses, the days I could barely walk down my own staircase, it was all artificially induced. Derek and Rachel had been feeding me a calculated daily cocktail of sedatives to mask the lethal, slow-acting heavy metal actively destroying my cardiovascular system. The darkest, most devastating realization of my entire life struck me. Martha. My beautiful, vibrant, loving wife did not die of a sudden, unavoidable medical tragedy. She had experienced the exact same severe joint pain. She had suffered the exact same frightening mental fog. They had systematically poisoned her, watching her slowly deteriorate, serving her toxic cups of herbal tea with bright, loving smiles, until her heart finally gave out under the immense strain. They murdered the woman I loved more than life itself, just to trigger the financial contingencies of a massive legal trust. And now, operating on a strict 2-week deadline, they were preparing to significantly double my dosage to finish the job and claim their bloody inheritance. The chemist leaned forward, breaking the heavy silence. "Sir," he said urgently, "this is a matter of severe criminal poisoning. I am legally obligated to advise you to contact the police immediately. We need to hand this report directly over to law enforcement." I looked down at the chemical graphs, a cold, dark abyss opening up inside my soul. If I called the local police right now, Derek and Rachel would simply be arrested in their beautiful home. They would immediately hire expensive defense attorneys, drag the painful process out through endless, exhausting legal appeals, and sit safely protected in a warm, heavily guarded jail cell. They would eat 3 meals a day and sleep soundly. That was absolutely not good enough. An arrest was far too clean, far too merciful for the monsters who tortured and murdered my wife. I looked up at the visibly shaken chemist, my eyes completely devoid of any remaining human warmth, paternal love, or basic mercy. "No," I whispered to the man folding the thick toxicology report and securely sliding it into my inner jacket pocket. "The police will absolutely not be necessary for me here today. I do not want my son to just quietly go to jail. I want to systematically obliterate his entire world and utterly destroy the two of them once and for all." I walked out of the private laboratory into the fading afternoon light, carrying the thick toxicology report inside my jacket like a loaded weapon. My profound grief had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, structural resolve. I drove my vehicle to a secure public payphone outside a decaying commercial strip mall on the desolate outskirts of the city, ensuring there was absolutely no digital trace of my communication. I dialed a private, strictly unlisted number I had memorized 3 decades ago. The line rang exactly twice before a gruff, deeply familiar voice answered the secure call with heavy suspicion. Gregory Barnes was not just my estate attorney. He was a ruthless, brilliant legal shark who had built his formidable reputation by utterly destroying anyone who attempted to cheat his wealthy clients. I told him I needed an immediate, completely clandestine meeting, strictly off the books, far away from his corporate downtown office. I told him my own son was actively trying to murder me. Gregory did not ask a single clarifying question. He simply gave me a specific address for a private, highly secure warehouse on the industrial side of the river and told me to drive there today. I arrived at the sprawling corrugated metal building as the heavy autumn rain began to fall. Gregory was waiting inside a stark, harshly lit office space constructed of reinforced glass and steel within the massive, empty warehouse. He wore a tailored black suit, his sharp, predatory eyes taking in my disheveled appearance as I walked through the door. I did not waste any time with pleasantries or emotional outbursts. I sat down at the cold steel table and placed the expedited toxicology report directly in front of him. Next to it, I placed several high-resolution photographs I captured earlier. These were the photographs of the forged power of attorney documents Derek had attempted to force upon me at that sleazy strip mall law firm. Gregory put on his reading glasses and opened the laboratory file. I watched his rigid jaw tighten as he read the complex chemical breakdown, his eyes scanning the terrifying paragraphs detailing the heavy sedatives and the lethal concentration of thallium. I watched him meticulously examine the photographs of the counterfeit trust amendments, specifically noting the fraudulent contingency clause designed to legally bypass the charitable donations and grant Derek complete unrestricted access to the massive estate. Gregory closed the file with a sharp, resounding snap. His face was a mask of cold, professional fury. He had managed Martha's legal affairs for 30 long years. He considered us close personal friends. The sudden realization that my son had systematically poisoned her for immense financial gain ignited a terrifying quiet wrath within the seasoned attorney. "We are absolutely not going to the police with this," Gregory stated, his voice completely devoid of any basic human emotion. "If we hand this specific evidence to the authorities right now, your son will immediately hire a massive, aggressive defense team today. They will loudly claim you are suffering from severe dementia, just as they have been heavily documenting for the past 5 months. They will argue the laboratory results are entirely circumstantial, or that you somehow accidentally poisoned yourself due to your rapid mental decline. Derek will easily drag this through the criminal court system for a decade while sitting comfortably on bail." I nodded slowly, completely, agreeing with his ruthless, accurate assessment. I told Gregory I wanted to dismantle Derek entirely, meticulously, stripping him of his fake prestige, his stolen wealth, and his freedom, leaving him with absolutely nothing forever. Gregory pulled a secure, encrypted laptop from his leather briefcase and began typing with furious mechanical precision. He told me he was bringing his elite team of forensic accountants online immediately. If Derek was taking such astronomical, desperate risks to illegally acquire $40 million within a strict 2-week window, there was a massive bleeding hole in his personal finances that urgently needed to be found. I sat in the sterile warehouse office for the next 4 grueling hours, listening to the relentless clicking of Gregory's keyboard and his hushed, intense phone calls with his brilliant financial investigators tonight. Gregory's team had unrestricted backdoor access to global banking networks, hidden offshore registries, and highly encrypted financial databases. They were digital hunters, relentlessly tracking the invisible, convoluted flow of capital across international borders. I watched the cold rain violently lash against the high warehouse windows, my mind completely focused on the impending total destruction of the man I once proudly called my son. Derek had always projected the flawless, perfect image of a highly successful, invincible investment banker. He wore custom expensive suits, drove sleek luxury imported vehicles, and frequently bragged about his massive, unbeatable stock portfolios without any hesitation. But as the clock slowly ticked past midnight, Gregory finally pushed his glowing laptop away from the center of the table. He took off his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a deep, incredibly heavy sigh. The profound truth he had uncovered was not just shocking, it was utterly pathetic. "Your son is a complete, absolute fraud," Thomas Gregory said quietly, turning the laptop screen so I could clearly see the cascading columns of red numbers. "The highly successful investment banker image is nothing but a hollow, desperately constructed facade engineered to completely deceive everyone around him. He does not have a massive, thriving stock portfolio. He does not even legally own that sprawling luxury estate he currently lives in with Rachel. The massive house is heavily mortgaged to the absolute breaking point, and he has secretly taken out 4 separate, highly illegal secondary loans against the sprawling property using completely falsified corporate income statements." I stared silently at the catastrophic financial ruin displayed prominently on the glowing screen. Gregory carefully tapped a specific folder on the digital dashboard, opening a series of highly complex, heavily encrypted transaction logs detailing 3 years of massive financial abuse everywhere. "Derek is a severe, utterly degenerate gambling addict," Gregory continued, his stern tone dripping with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Over the past 3 long years, he has completely liquidated his entire legitimate savings to recklessly fund massive, highly volatile cryptocurrency speculations and illegal offshore sports betting syndicates. When the global crypto market suddenly crashed and his incredibly aggressive bets failed miserably, he began aggressively borrowing heavily on high margin to desperately cover his enormous, rapidly mounting losses. According to the exhaustive forensic audit, Derek is currently drowning in exactly $15 million of unsecured, totally illegal offshore gambling debt right now." I silently absorbed the staggering number. $15 million. Gregory leaned forward over the steel table, his professional expression turning incredibly dark and fiercely grim. "It gets infinitely worse," Thomas, the veteran attorney, warned, pulling up a highly classified file his expert team had just successfully intercepted from a secure dark web communication server. The massive money Derek illegally borrowed came directly from a highly violent, extremely ruthless underground criminal syndicate. Intercepted messages confirm they are actively threatening to brutally murder Derek. He is murdering his parents to steal $40 million strictly to save his own miserable skin today. The revelation hung in the cold, sterile air of the industrial warehouse like a physical weight. $15 million in debt to men who did not send polite collection letters or negotiate payment plans. My son was not just a greedy, entitled opportunist seeking an early inheritance. He was a cornered, desperate animal actively drowning in a violent criminal underworld, willing to systematically slaughter his own parents to buy his survival. I looked across the steel table at Gregory. The veteran attorney's face was carved from absolute granite. He slowly closed the classified financial file on his encrypted laptop, steepled his fingers, and waited in absolute silence for my directive. I told him we were not going to wait for Derek to attempt another clumsy legal maneuver or draft another forged document. We were going to hand my son exactly what he desperately wanted, but we were going to lace it with invisible federal razor wire. Gregory's lips curled into a sharp, terrifying smile, and he immediately pulled his laptop back open, his fingers flying across the keyboard. We spent the next 3 grueling hours constructing a brilliant, devastating financial snare. Gregory called it a digital honeypot. Using his elite high-level banking contacts, he cleanly severed exactly $5 million from my primary estate holdings and moved it into a newly created, highly restricted subsidiary account. This specific account was rigged with complex digital tripwires. We then drafted a very narrow, highly specific partial power of attorney. It was completely unlike the sweeping blank check document Derek had tried to force upon me at that dilapidated strip mall law firm. This new document granted my son the temporary legal authorization to manage trade and execute transactions solely within this single $5 million account. I asked Gregory how this specific maneuver would destroy him. Gregory explained the mechanics with cold, clinical precision. By granting Derek access to this specific account, under the strict guise of legitimate domestic investment management, we were actively inviting him to step over a massive, uncrossable legal line. The moment Derek attempted to wire those funds to an unverified offshore entity to pay his illegal gambling debts, he would be committing textbook, irrefutable federal wire fraud. Furthermore, because the account was digitally tagged by Gregory's forensic team, the attorney was secretly looping in his highest contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Cyber Division would be actively monitoring the routing address the exact second the international wire transfer was initiated. It was a trap that carried a mandatory lengthy federal prison sentence, completely circumventing any local police jurisdiction or expensive bail hearings. I left the industrial warehouse just as the bleak morning dawn began to break, painting the city skyline in bruised shades of purple and charcoal. I drove back to my sprawling, quiet house, mentally preparing my mind and body for the absolute performance of my life. When I walked through the heavy front door, Rachel was already awake in the kitchen, cheerfully brewing another fresh pot of her lethal aromatic chamomile tea. I immediately let my shoulders slump forward, dragging my feet heavily across the polished hardwood floor, breathing with a deliberate rattling wheeze that echoed in the quiet foyer. She rushed over her face a flawless mask of practiced cloying concern, gently chiding me for wandering out of the house so early in my fragile condition. I told her I had simply gone to the local pharmacy to pick up the new vitamin supplements she had requested, playing the confused, highly compliant victim to absolute perfection. I gratefully took the steaming mug she offered, carried it slowly into my private study, and poured the toxic liquid directly into the trash bin, perfectly masking the splashing sound with a loud, violent coughing fit. Later that afternoon, I called Derek. I told him my chest was feeling incredibly tight. My mind was fading faster than ever, and I needed him to come over to the house immediately. I told him I needed to make things right between us. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, the tires of his expensive luxury SUV screeching loudly as he pulled recklessly into the long driveway. He practically ran into the house, his eyes darting around the hallway with barely concealed frantic desperation. He desperately needed that capital. The underground syndicate's deadline was likely terrifyingly close, breathing violently down his neck. I was sitting in my large leather armchair in the center of the study, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, deliberately trembling. I gestured weakly for him to sit down in the chair across from my mahogany desk. "Derek," I whispered, letting my voice crack with manufactured, pathetic sorrow. "I am so terribly tired. I simply cannot fight these complex administrative battles anymore. You were absolutely right yesterday. I am rapidly losing my grip on things, and I am terrified of ruining the financial legacy I proudly built with your mother." Derek leaned forward aggressively, his hands gripping his knees, fighting to mask his predatory eagerness, with a sickening look of deep filial sympathy. "It is going to be okay, Dad," he murmured smoothly, his voice dripping with false reassurance. "I am here for you. I will handle all the heavy lifting from now on. You just need to sign the paperwork we looked at yesterday, and you can finally rest." I slowly shook my head, letting a single practiced tear slip down my weathered cheek. I told him my fragile heart simply could not handle the immense stress of signing away the entire $40 million estate all at once. I told him it felt too much like giving up on my life entirely. Instead, I pulled Gregory's newly drafted manila folder from beneath my wool blanket and slid it slowly across the desk. I told him I had spoken with a junior clerk at the bank early this morning. I explained that I had isolated $5 million into a separate dedicated trading account. I wanted him to take over this specific account first to manage some aggressive investments for me just to ease my anxious mind. I promised him that if he did well with this initial portfolio, we could comfortably discuss transferring the rest of the family trust next month. Derek stared down at the crisp white documents resting on the desk. $5 million. I could practically see the frantic, desperate calculations running violently behind his dark eyes. It was not the full $40 million he desperately needed to steal, but it was a massive, immediate injection of liquid capital. It was more than enough to buy him crucial time to temporarily silence the violent men actively hunting him, to secure his immediate survival, while he figured out how to quietly finish me off and take the rest of the estate. Greed and sheer, unadulterated desperation waged a violent, visible war on his face. He picked up the legal document, his eyes rapidly scanning the narrow, specific clauses. Gregory had drafted it perfectly. To a desperate, drowning man, it looked exactly like a legitimate, incredibly lucky windfall from a senile father. Derek reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out his heavy silver fountain pen. He did not hesitate for another single second. He aggressively signed his name on the dotted line with a rapid, elegant flourish, legally binding his own wrists to the federal honeypot. I breathed a heavy, exhausted sigh, leaning my head back against the leather chair, telling him the account was fully active and the digital routing access codes were printed clearly on the second page. I casually asked him if he could handle a quick trade today, just to get things started and ease my mind. Derek gave me a sharp, victorious smile, completely unaware he was gleefully smiling at his own absolute destruction. He pulled out his sleek laptop right there on my desk, his fingers flying frantically across the keyboard. He quickly logged into the banking portal, and within exactly 3 minutes, he initiated a massive, untraceable offshore wire transfer for the entire $5 million. He hit execute. The quiet digital chime of the completed transaction echoed softly in the silent study. Derek closed his laptop, letting out a long, shaky breath of pure, overwhelming relief. He stood up awkwardly, patting my shoulder, telling me to rest quietly, assuring me that everything was going to be perfectly fine now. He walked confidently out of the room, leaving me alone in the shadows. The exact moment the heavy wooden door clicked shut, my secure cell phone vibrated violently against my chest. I pulled it out. It was a highly encrypted message from Gregory. The wire transfer was successfully intercepted. The federal tripwire had been instantly triggered. The cyber division of the FBI had successfully logged his exact IP address, capturing the illicit offshore routing numbers directly associated with the violent underground syndicate. Derek had just handed federal investigators the absolute smoking gun on a silver platter. He was officially trapped in an ironclad, inescapable cage of his own making. I stared at the glowing screen, a cold, dark satisfaction settling deep into my bones. My son was going to lose his freedom, his pristine reputation, and his entire future. But just as I began to slide the device back into my pocket, another urgent alert flashed rapidly across the encrypted screen. It was not a message from my lawyer. It was a secure, heavily encrypted text from Leo, the young, terrified audio technician I had left working in the back room of that cramped repair shop. I opened the message. The text was incredibly brief, but it made the blood freeze solidly in my veins. "Get to the shop now." Leo wrote, his absolute terror bleeding through the digital text. "I have finally decrypted the remaining hidden segments of the audio file from your wife's glasses. It is infinitely worse than we thought." Leo's message burned in my mind. I did not waste a second celebrating the trap I had successfully sprung on my son. I grabbed my keys, slipped out the side door into the afternoon rain, and climbed into my sedan. The drive across town was a blur of traffic lights and slick asphalt. My hands gripped the steering wheel with such crushing force that my knuckles turned completely white. I navigated the familiar streets leading toward the commercial district, my stomach twisting into knots. What could possibly be worse than knowing my own flesh and blood had poisoned the love of my life? I pulled into the cracked parking lot of the electronics repair shop, tires splashing. The neon open sign in the front window was already switched off. I hurried through the pouring rain and pulled the heavy glass door open. Leo was standing nervously behind the cluttered service counter, looking pale and physically sick. The exact moment I stepped inside, the young technician rushed forward, flipped the heavy deadbolt, and pulled the metal security blinds shut. The cramped shop plunged into deep, suffocating shadows, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of a single computer monitor resting on his main workbench. "You need to sit down for this." "Mr. Caldwell," Leo whispered, his voice trembling in the quiet space. He pulled up an office chair and gently guided me into it. "I spent 12 hours running complex decryption algorithms on the damaged memory blocks inside your wife's smart glasses. I thought it was just a corrupted audio file, a malfunction in the background software. But the impact of her fall did not just damage the microphone. It triggered a hidden video cache built into the device firmware. The glasses were recording visual data directly to a partition, right before the central processor shattered against the floor. I reconstructed the final 3 minutes of visual and audio data. I sat frozen in the chair, my breath catching in my throat. Martha had purchased those smart glasses to help her read small print and record recipe videos without using her hands. I never imagined they would serve as the silent witness to her own murder. "Play it," I commanded, my voice stripping away the fragile old man I had been pretending to be. Leo hesitated, his hand hovering over the computer mouse. He looked at me with profound pity, then clicked the mouse. The large monitor instantly flickered to life. The digital image was initially distorted, filled with jagged static lines, before suddenly sharpening into breathtaking, horrific clarity. I was instantly looking out through my beautiful wife's own eyes. The visual perspective shifted naturally as she moved gracefully around our brightly lit kitchen. I could hear her soft, familiar humming. It was a gentle melody she had sung for decades, a beautiful, comforting sound that instantly shattered my aching heart into 1,000 pieces. She was standing near the marble island, peacefully pouring a simple cup of water. Suddenly, the camera perspective jerked violently. A sharp, agonized gasp tore loudly through the repaired audio feed. Martha dropped the heavy glass. I watched it shatter into countless shimmering pieces across the polished hardwood floor. Her breathing became shallow, rapid, and painfully labored. The camera angle tilted downward aggressively as she collapsed heavily onto the hard kitchen tiles. Her hands came directly into view, clutching desperately at her own chest. She was suffering the massive chemically induced heart attack the chemist had warned me about. The accumulating thallium toxicity had finally triggered a catastrophic cardiovascular failure. The visual feed shook violently as Martha desperately tried to drag herself across the cold floor, reaching out weakly toward the lower kitchen cabinets. Her voice, incredibly faint and filled with absolute terror, echoed loudly through the small repair shop speakers. "Derek." She gasped her words, slurring painfully together. "Rachel, please, help me." A pair of stylish designer heels stepped casually into the video frame. The camera tilted upward slowly. Rachel was standing directly over my dying wife. She wore a pristine white blouse, casually holding a fresh cup of steaming coffee. Her immaculate expression was entirely devoid of any panic sadness or human concern. It was a rigid mask of cold, terrifying indifference. Rachel Martha wheezed, her hand reaching up, trembling violently in the digital frame. "My pills. On the counter. Please. It is my heart. I cannot breathe at all." Rachel slowly crouched down, placing her ceramic coffee mug neatly onto the granite counter. She reached over gracefully and picked up the bright orange prescription bottle containing Martha's emergency nitroglycerin pills. The camera captured perfectly the clear plastic bottle resting securely in Rachel's manicured hand. My poor wife let out a soft, desperate whimper of profound relief, foolishly believing salvation was finally within her grasp. Instead, Rachel maintained dead, empty eye contact with Martha, unscrewed the plastic child-proof cap with a smooth, practiced motion, and calmly walked directly over to the stainless steel kitchen sink. The restored audio feed captured the distinct, horrific sound of dozens of life-saving pills rattling loudly down the metal drain, followed instantly by the loud sound of running water, washing them permanently away. Martha let out a choked, devastated sob. The camera angle dropped flat against the floor as her remaining physical strength completely evaporated. She was utterly helpless, watching her own daughter-in-law systematically deny her the very medication that could have saved her life. Then another set of heavy footsteps confidently entered the quiet kitchen, shattering the silence. Derek walked slowly into the absolute center of the digital frame. He was wearing expensive running shoes, looking down at his struggling mother with a detached, clinical curiosity, exactly as one might observe an insect struggling on the hot pavement. He crouched down right beside Rachel, leaning in incredibly close. His face filled the entire digital screen. He was looking directly into the hidden camera lens embedded in the thick frame of the smart glasses, entirely unaware he was being recorded in high-definition video. The unadulterated evil actively radiating from his dark, greedy eyes made me physically sick to my aching stomach. He reached out and gently stroked Martha's hair, a grotesque, sickening mockery of a loving son comforting his mother in her final moments. I sat completely paralyzed in the small repair shop, my fingernails digging viciously deep into the armrests of the office chair, violently forced to witness the exact, terrifying moment how my family was permanently destroyed. Derek leaned his face just inches from the hidden microphone. His voice was a soft, deadly whisper that seemed to echo infinitely in the cramped, perfectly silent room. "Sorry, Mom," Derek murmured softly, his tone chillingly smooth, incredibly steady, and entirely devoid of any human soul or basic mercy. "I need the trust. Dad won't suspect a thing. He's too trusting." The video feed held steadily on his cold, empty, and terrifying smile for one more agonizing second. Then I distinctly heard the terrible, wet, rattling sound of my wife's final desperate breath. The camera jerked slightly as her broken body went completely limp against the cold kitchen tiles, and the digital screen instantly cut to pitch black. The camera jerked slightly as her broken body went completely limp against the cold kitchen tiles, and the digital screen instantly cut to pitch black. I sat in the dim, oppressive silence of the cramped electronics repair shop. The harsh blue light of the idle computer monitor cast long, hollow shadows across the scarred wooden workbench. I did not scream. I did not weep. I did not fall to my knees in an uncontrollable fit of agony. The profound, suffocating sorrow that had heavily anchored my soul for the past 5 agonizing months simply vanished. In a matter of seconds, the crushing raw grief was entirely incinerated, completely burned away by a sudden terrifying wave of pure weaponized fury. My mind, usually a quiet repository of complex structural mathematics and load-bearing calculations, snapped into a state of absolute ice-cold clarity. Derek had not just watched his mother die. He had actively orchestrated her murder callously, tossing away her life-saving medication while staring dead into her eyes, all to accelerate his access to a financial trust he desperately needed to cover his pathetic illicit debts. Beside me, the young technician was violently trembling. Leo was staring at the blank computer screen, his face drained of all color, his chest heaving with shallow, terrified breaths. He reached out with a shaking hand, his fingers desperately fumbling across the cluttered desk to grab his cellular phone. "Mr. Caldwell," Leo stammered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "We have to call the police right now. We have to show them this video. They will arrest him tonight for murder." I reached out with a perfectly steady hand and firmly wrapped my fingers around his trembling wrist. I gently pushed his hand away from the telephone, maintaining a grip that was calm but undeniably commanding. "No, Leo," I said smoothly, my voice lacking any trace of the frail, confused senior citizen I had been acting as just hours ago. "We are absolutely not calling the local police. If we call the authorities right now, they will quietly arrest Derek in the comfort of his own home. He will immediately hire a team of expensive, aggressive defense lawyers. They will tie this video up in endless procedural court hearings. They will claim the footage is digitally altered, or they will push for a long drawn-out trial where he gets to sit comfortably on bail while spending the very money he stole from my accounts. A quiet arrest is far too merciful for what he did to my wife." Leo swallowed hard, his wide eyes darting from the dark screen back to my face. "Then what do you want to do?" he whispered nervously. I stood up from the office chair, feeling a sudden, powerful surge of adrenaline pumping rapidly through my veins. The lethal thallium and heavy sedatives coursing through my system were momentarily overpowered by the sheer primal instinct to annihilate a predator. "Tomorrow evening is Derek's 35th birthday," I explained coldly, pacing slowly across the narrow floor of the repair shop. "He is throwing himself an incredibly lavish, highly exclusive gala in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton downtown. He has invited over 300 guests. His entire network of wealthy investment banking colleagues will be there. The underground syndicate contacts he owes $15 million to will be there masquerading as legitimate corporate investors. And the most sickening irony of it all is that he paid for this massive opulent celebration using my personal credit cards, proudly boasting to his friends about his incredible financial success." I stopped pacing and looked directly at the young technician. "I am not going to let him hide behind closed doors," I stated firmly. "I am going to utterly destroy him in front of every single person he desperately wants to impress. I am going to strip away his money, his freedom, and his pristine public reputation, all at the exact same moment. I want him completely humiliated, ruined, and trapped with absolutely nowhere left to run." Leo nodded slowly, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. He turned back to his intricate computer setup. "Tell me exactly what you need me to do," he said, his voice finally steadying. "Export the fully restored, decrypted video file immediately," I instructed him, pointing a firm finger at the glowing monitor. "Put the highest resolution version of that footage onto a master USB flash drive. I want the audio crystal clear. I want every single syllable of his confession perfectly audible. Make 2 secure backup copies and hide them here in your shop vault. I will take the master drive with me tonight." As Leo quickly began executing the complex digital commands running the video feed through a rendering program to ensure the file was completely stable, I pulled my encrypted cell phone from my jacket pocket. I navigated to my secure contacts and dialed Gregory Barnes. The veteran attorney answered the private line immediately, his tone sharp and alert. Thomas Gregory said briskly, "The cyber division just confirmed the initial wire transfer hit the restricted honeypot account." Derek completely took the bait. "The digital trap is successfully locked." "That is excellent news, Gregory," I replied smoothly, my voice practically echoing the cold, mechanical precision of a steel trap snapping shut. But the situation has fundamentally escalated. I am currently at an electronics shop. I just watched a recovered video file from Martha's smart glasses. Derek and Rachel murdered her Gregory. They purposely withheld her emergency heart medication and watched her die on the kitchen floor while mocking my trust. A heavy, deadly silence fell over the encrypted cellular line. When Gregory finally spoke, his voice was a deep, terrifying growl. "I will personally see him rot in a federal cage for the rest of his miserable life," the lawyer vowed. "Give me the word, Thomas. How do you want to execute the final blow?" "I need you to contact your lead agent at the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now," I ordered calmly. "Tell the cyber division we are accelerating the timeline. I do not want them storming my house tonight." Derek is hosting a massive birthday gala at the Ritz-Carlton tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. His underground syndicate handlers will be in attendance. I want the federal agents waiting in the wings. I want them to seal every single exit of that ballroom. "Consider it done," Gregory confirmed instantly. "I will have the federal tactical units positioned in the hotel service corridors. They will be entirely invisible until you give the absolute final signal." "What is your play with the video file?" I watched Leo carefully eject a sleek black USB drive from his computer tower. He handed the small digital weapon directly to me. I slipped it securely into the inner pocket of my jacket, letting my hand rest flat against the fabric. "I am going to give my son a birthday present he will never forget," I told the seasoned attorney. "Tomorrow night, when he makes his toast, I will hijack the screens. He will completely lose everything on a silver platter. Drop the hammer tonight." The following evening, I stood before the full-length mirror in my master bedroom and meticulously adjusted the silk lapels of my tailored charcoal tuxedo. For the past 5 months, I had actively practiced the humiliating posture of a dying, broken man. I had hunched my shoulders, dragged my feet, and allowed my voice to quaver with manufactured weakness. Tonight, that pathetic performance was officially terminated. I stood perfectly straight, my spine completely rigid, my shoulders squared, and my jaw set with the unyielding strength of a structural steel beam. I slipped the master USB drive into my inner breast pocket, letting it rest directly over my heart. The cold, hard edge of the plastic casing was a constant comforting reminder of the absolute devastation I was about to unleash. I drove myself to the Ritz-Carlton. The rain from the previous night had cleared, leaving the downtown streets slick and reflecting the glowing neon lights of the financial district. I handed my keys to the valet with a firm, steady motion and walked through the massive revolving glass doors of the luxury hotel. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in grotesque stolen opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of guests dressed in high-end designer gowns and bespoke suits. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the loud, arrogant chatter of investment bankers, corporate executives, and the dangerous, quiet men lurking in the periphery who represented the violent underground syndicate. Derek had spared absolutely no expense, effortlessly spending my hard-earned money to project an image of untouchable financial supremacy. I stepped onto the thick carpet of the ballroom, scanning the massive crowd with absolute predatory focus. It did not take long to locate them. Derek was standing near a towering ice sculpture, holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, laughing loudly at a joke made by a man with cold, dead eyes and a tailored silk suit. Rachel was draped elegantly on Derek's arm, wearing a diamond necklace that likely cost more than my first home. As I moved smoothly through the sea of guests, my presence registered like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. I did not shuffle. I did not cough. I walked with the heavy, undeniable authority of a man who possessed absolute control over his domain. Rachel saw me first. The flawless, practiced smile completely froze on her face. Her perfectly manicured hand tightened viciously around Derek's bicep. She whispered something urgently into his ear. Derek turned his head. His arrogant laughter died instantly in his throat. He stared at me, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated confusion. He was expecting the frail, confused old man who had practically begged for help in the study yesterday afternoon. He was expecting a victim heavily sedated by a doubled dose of toxic tea, perhaps entirely unable to even attend the gala. Instead, he was looking at a formidable, imposing patriarch, radiating an icy, terrifying vitality. For a fleeting second, raw panic flashed across his face. He quickly excused himself from the dangerous syndicate figures and practically sprinted across the ballroom floor to intercept me before I could mingle with the wealthy guests. Dad Derek gasped, his voice tight and breathless, as he stepped directly into my path. "What are you doing walking around like this? You look so different today. Are you sure you should even be out of bed?" I looked him directly in the eyes, allowing my gaze to remain completely flat and entirely devoid of any paternal warmth. "I feel remarkably well tonight, Derek," I stated smoothly, my voice projecting a deep, resonant strength that made him visibly flinch. "It is absolutely amazing what a single day of proper rest and a clear mind can do for a man's overall constitution. I would not miss your 35th birthday celebration for anything in the world." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously above his silk bow tie. He desperately tried to read my expression, searching frantically for any sign that I knew the truth, but my face was an impenetrable fortress of stone. He forced a stiff, awkward smile, deciding to play along, desperately needing to secure his immediate financial survival. "Well, I am incredibly glad you are feeling stronger," he murmured, leaning in close and lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He checked over his shoulder, ensuring none of his high society guests or syndicate handlers were within earshot. He grabbed my elbow, attempting to gently guide me toward a quiet alcove near the draped velvet curtains, but I firmly planted my feet, completely refusing to be moved. "Listen, Dad. I wanted to tell you the good news," Derek whispered urgently, his eyes gleaming with a sickening cocktail of greedy desperation and profound relief. "That dedicated trading account you set up for me yesterday, the $5 million. I successfully executed the initial transactions this morning. I moved the capital into a highly secure offshore investment portfolio. It is going to yield massive immediate returns for the family trust. You do not have to worry about a single financial burden ever again. I have completely taken care of everything." My stomach physically churned at the sheer breathtaking audacity of his lies. He was standing right in front of me, proudly boasting about committing federal wire fraud, entirely convinced he had successfully stolen my life savings to pay off the violent men actively hunting him. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had secured his future, completely unaware that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had instantly logged his illegal transfer, completely documenting his digital fingerprints and securing the necessary criminal warrants. I let out a slow, measured breath. I looked at the man who shared my last name. There was absolutely nothing left to salvage here. The biological connection between us was completely severed, cleanly cut by his unadulterated sociopathic greed. I reached out and placed a firm, heavy hand directly onto his shoulder. I gripped his expensive suit jacket, squeezing my fingers with enough sudden, violent pressure to make him wince slightly in unexpected pain. "You have made your bed, son," I said softly. The words were quiet, but they carried the devastating, undeniable weight of a heavy iron gavel striking a wooden block. Derek blinked, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What does that mean, Dad?" I did not offer him a single syllable of explanation. I smoothly released my grip on his shoulder, turned my back on him completely, and walked away. I left him standing alone near the velvet curtains. I moved purposefully through the crowded room, gliding past the crystal chandeliers, the lavish buffet tables, and the heavily armed syndicate enforcers mingling in the shadows. My destination was the primary audiovisual control booth, heavily concealed behind a row of tall floral arrangements. I stepped behind the thick black curtains and pushed the soundproof door open. Leo was sitting perfectly still, illuminated by the harsh blue light of a master control laptop. He wore a simple black catering uniform, completely blending in as an invisible technical assistant. I quietly handed him the loaded digital flash drive. Leo took the rectangle from my hand, inserting it directly into the master input port of his central broadcasting console. A glowing green light pulsed softly, confirming the lethal payload was primed and locked into the hotel's audiovisual network. I gave the young technician a single nod of gratitude, then turned around and slipped quietly back through the velvet curtains. The staggering noise of the grand ballroom instantly washed over me again, a chaotic symphony of clinking crystal-loud jazz and the hollow laughter of the corrupt. I navigated the crowded floor with purposeful steps, ignoring curious glances of corporate associates who recognized me but were unsure how to approach the fading patriarch. I made my way toward the primary VIP table situated at the front of the massive stage. The table was draped in white silk and adorned with towering arrangements of orchids. I took my assigned seat sitting perfectly upright in the gilded chair, smoothing the lapels of my tuxedo with deliberate icy composure. To my left sat a row of influential bank executives, men who managed billions and controlled the local financial sector. To my right sat a terrifyingly quiet group of men in dark suits who did not smile, did not mingle, and drank their expensive liquor with cold, calculating eyes. These were undoubtedly the high-ranking representatives of the underground criminal syndicate, the ruthless debt collectors Derek had desperately attempted to pay off just a few hours ago using my isolated honeypot account. They were sitting comfortably in the open, fully believing their $15 million extortion was successfully completed. I looked at their hard faces and felt a satisfying thrill, knowing the Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical units were already positioned silently in the service corridors behind the kitchen, waiting patiently for my imminent command. Suddenly, the string quartet abruptly ceased playing. The crystal chandeliers dimmed significantly, casting a dramatic spotlight directly onto the center of the polished wooden stage. A hushed, expectant silence rippled rapidly across the expansive ballroom as the 300 wealthy guests eagerly turned their attention forward. Derek stepped confidently into the bright pool of light, holding a flute of sparkling champagne high in his right hand. He looked absolutely radiant, the undeniable picture of youthful success. His custom-tailored suit fit him flawlessly, catching the light as he offered a charismatic smile to his audience. "Thank you all for coming tonight." Derek began, his voice amplified by the sound system echoing with manufactured sincerity. He paused, allowing a wave of polite applause to wash over the room before humbly lowering his head. "To see so many incredible friends and vital partners gathered here to celebrate my 35th birthday is the greatest honor of my life. We have achieved massive, unprecedented milestones together this past year. We have navigated incredibly turbulent waters, conquered incredibly volatile markets, and built highly lucrative portfolios that secure our futures. But tonight is not just about celebrating corporate victories or aggressive market expansions." Derek took a slow, dramatic step forward, his voice dropping into a softer, intimately sympathetic register. He expertly manipulated the cadence of his speech, playing the crowd with the sickening skill of a seasoned predator. "Tonight is about celebrating the core foundation that makes any of this possible. It is about honoring deep, unshakable family values. It is about acknowledging the profound sacrifices made by the people who tirelessly built the sturdy platform we currently stand upon." He turned his gaze directly toward my VIP table, placing his free hand flat against his chest, right over his treacherous heart. "As many of you know, this has been an incredibly difficult, painful year for my family." Derek continued, his voice perfectly catching with artificial emotion. 5 months ago, we lost my beloved mother, Martha. She was the absolute guiding light of our lives. The warm, compassionate soul who taught me the true, enduring value of kindness, patience, and unconditional love. Her tragic passing left an unfathomable void in our home that can never be filled. I think about her beautiful smile every single morning. I think about her gentle wisdom every night. Everything I do, every deal I finalize, I do strictly to honor her enduring memory. The crowd collectively sighed, a murmur of genuine sympathy rippling through the audience. I glanced sideways. Rachel, sitting at the adjacent table, delicately dabbed her eye with a sheer lace handkerchief, masterfully wiping away an entirely fake tear. My jaw clenched with immense force. The sheer audacity of their coordinated performance made my blood boil with a toxic heat. They were standing in front of hundreds of people, openly exploiting the tragic death they actively caused, wearing their manufactured grief like a designer accessory to garner social sympathy and blind corporate trust. And of course, Derek added, his voice trembling, with a masterful display of filial devotion as he gestured openly toward me. I must publicly honor my father, Thomas, the visionary architect of our family trust. As many of you can see, his health has rapidly declined since the devastating loss of his beloved wife. It has been incredibly difficult watching the strongest man I know face such severe, heartbreaking physical struggles. But Dad, I want you to know right now in front of all our friends that I am here to carry the heavy burden. I will proudly protect the incredible legacy you built. I will stand strong so you can rest. A loud round of applause erupted throughout the grand ballroom. The wealthy guests stood up from their chairs, clapping enthusiastically, thoroughly moved by the tragic narrative of a devoted son valiantly stepping up to protect his vulnerable father. The syndicate men remained seated, but raised their glasses in a silent, approving toast to the man who had just paid them millions. I remained perfectly still at the VIP table, my hands resting flat against the cool silk tablecloth. I did not clap. I simply stared at the monster standing on the stage, channeling every ounce of my weaponized, ice-cold fury into a completely blank, terrifyingly calm expression. Derek smiled warmly, absorbing the unearned adoration of the massive crowd. He waited patiently for the enthusiastic applause to gently die down before raising his champagne flute one final time. To properly conclude this beautiful evening before we serve the main course, Derek announced brightly, his voice echoing cleanly through the speakers, I have prepared a very special visual tribute. Please direct your attention to the screen behind me. And now a curated slideshow honoring the remarkable, loving woman who made me exactly who I am today. My sweet mother. Derek turned around smoothly and pointed directly toward the massive 20-foot projector screen, hanging directly above the stage. The bright stage lights instantly cut to black, plunging the entire room into deep theatrical darkness. The crowd fell completely silent, shifting in their seats, eagerly awaiting a touching montage of family memories. I slowly reached my hand beneath the white silk tablecloth. I felt the cold plastic of the communication device Leo had given me. I pressed my thumb firmly against the single transmission button. I gave Leo the silent signal to drop the hammer. The darkness of the grand ballroom felt suffocating as the massive projector screen flickered to life. Derek stood proudly on the polished wooden stage, a smug, expectant smile plastered across his face. He held his crystal champagne flute ready to toast a completely fabricated memory of his mother. The 300 wealthy guests shifted comfortably in their gilded chairs, their eyes fixed on the glowing white rectangle. They were prepared for a sentimental journey, a carefully curated montage of childhood photographs designed to cement Derek's public image. Instead, the high-definition projector emitted a harsh, jagged burst of digital static. A loud squeal tore through the sound system, instantly silencing the polite murmurs of the crowd. The screen fractured into chaotic data blocks before snapping violently into focus. The image that materialized was a raw, deeply disorienting, first-person perspective. It was the restored visual feed, directly from my beautiful wife's damaged smart glasses. The sheer scale of the projection made the visceral reality of the footage inescapable. Martha's magnified hands appeared on the massive screen, casually reaching out to pour a glass of water in our brightly lit kitchen. Her soft, familiar humming resonated through the towering concert speakers. The gentle melody echoed eerily across the opulent space. For 5 agonizing seconds, the high society crowd simply stared in absolute silence. Then the horrific medical event began. The screen jerked violently, the visual feed tilting at a sickening angle. A sharp gasp ripped through the silence of the ballroom, magnified 100 times by the subwoofers. It was pure human suffering. On the screen, the heavy glass shattered into countless fragments across the kitchen floor. The impact sounded like a bomb detonating inside the hushed hotel venue. The crowd flinched collectively, an involuntary ripple of alarm washing across the room. The camera angle dropped drastically as Martha collapsed heavily onto the hard tiles. Her magnified hands clawed desperately at her own chest, her breathing shallow and painfully labored. The audio feed was crystal clear, capturing every wheeze, every desperate struggle for oxygen, as the lethal thallium ravaged her failing cardiovascular system. A woman near the front row let out a stifled gasp, pressing her manicured hand over her mouth. The investment bankers and the dangerous syndicate men sat frozen in paralyzing horror. Derek, my wife, wheezed through the speakers, her voice filled with naked terror. "Rachel, please, help me." The massive screen captured sleek designer heels stepping casually into the frame. The camera tilted upward slowly, revealing Rachel standing directly over her dying mother-in-law. She held a ceramic coffee mug, her face an unyielding mask of cold, terrifying indifference. Rachel Martha gasped, her trembling hand reaching upward in a desperate plea for survival. "My pills. On the counter. Please. It is my heart. I cannot breathe at all." The entire ballroom held its breath. 300 people watched in dead silence as the colossal image of Rachel calmly crouched down. They watched her pick up the bright orange prescription bottle. They watched her unscrew the child-proof cap with smooth, chilling precision. A collective shudder ripped through the audience as Rachel walked directly over to the kitchen sink. The audio system blasted the horrific sound of dozens of life-saving pills rattling loudly down the metal drain. It was followed instantly by the rushing sound of cold tap water permanently washing away her only chance at survival. A low, sickened murmur began to build rapidly in the back of the room. Pure, visceral disgust radiated from the assembled guests, but the digital execution was not completely finished. Another set of heavy footsteps confidently entered the kitchen audio feed. Derek walked slowly into the absolute center of the 20-foot screen. He crouched down beside Rachel, leaning in incredibly close to his dying mother. His face, magnified to monstrous proportions, filled the entire stage backdrop. The crowd stared directly into the eyes of the man who had just hosted them. The pure evil radiating from his digital gaze made the opulent ballroom feel colder than a morgue. He gently stroked Martha's hair, a grotesque mockery of affection that made several guests turn their faces away in revulsion. He leaned his face just inches from the hidden microphone embedded in his mother's glasses. "Sorry, Mom," Derek whispered. The digital audio was flawless. The smooth, deadly words boomed across the entire room, echoing violently off the walls. "I need the trust. Dad won't suspect a thing. He's too trusting." The entire grand ballroom seemed to collectively plunge into a dark, bottomless abyss. The massive screen held steadily on his cold, empty, and terrifying smile for one final, agonizing second. Then the speakers broadcast the terrible, wet, rattling sound of my wife's final desperate breath. The camera jerked slightly as her broken body went completely limp against the cold tiles, and the colossal screen instantly cut to pitch black. A deafening silence suffocated the room for exactly 3 seconds. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal had paralyzed every single person in attendance. Then the crystal chandeliers violently snapped back on, instantly flooding the entire ballroom with bright, unforgiving light. The blinding illumination completely shattered the terrible spell. The fragile crystal champagne flute finally slipped from Derek's paralyzed fingers. It hit the polished wooden stage and shattered into 100 sparkling pieces, the sharp cracking sound ringing out like a gunshot. The sound broke the dam. Rachel let out a piercing, hysterical scream of pure panic, stumbling backward away from the stage, her hands clutching her head in absolute terror. The distinguished crowd erupted into a massive, chaotic uproar. Wealthy executives shouted in sheer outrage, disgusted murmurs turning quickly into loud, aggressive accusations. The quiet, dangerous men from the syndicate stood up slowly from their tables, their cold eyes locking directly onto Derek with lethal intent. They realized instantly that their $15 million debtor was not a wealthy investment genius, but a pathetic, exposed murderer about to be engulfed by the federal justice system. Derek stood frozen in the absolute center of the stage, his perfect, custom-tailored world completely evaporating into dust around him. His face was entirely drained of blood, a ghastly, sickening shade of pale gray. His jaw worked silently, trying desperately to construct a plausible lie, but there was nowhere left to hide. The digital evidence was irrefutable, completely damning, and entirely public. Slowly, agonizingly, his terrified eyes scanned the chaotic sea of outraged faces, desperately searching for an anchor in the storm. His gaze finally swept across the front row and violently locked onto mine. I was sitting perfectly still at the primary VIP table. I did not scream. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I maintained a posture of absolute structural rigidity, my face a cold mask of pure, weaponized fury. As Derek stared into my eyes, navigating the wrath radiating from my calm demeanor, the catastrophic truth finally breached his panicking mind. He saw the complete absence of the frail, confused senior citizen he had systematically manipulated for months. He saw the cold, calculated engineer who had meticulously deconstructed his entire life. The color completely drained from his quivering lips as he realized that I had orchestrated this entire devastating public execution right in front of his high society peers. He was utterly destroyed, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. For 5 agonizing long months, I had played the perfect victim, slowly building my invisible trap piece by piece. Now the predator was finally caught in the crushing steel jaws of my meticulously engineered justice, and I was going to watch him lose absolutely everything he desperately loved. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical units waiting silently in the hidden service corridors were about to make their final entrance. The immense weight of the silence in the grand ballroom finally broke, shattering into chaotic pieces. Derek tore his terrified gaze away from my unyielding stare. His chest heaved with violent breaths as his constructed reality dissolved into a devastating nightmare. He staggered backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished mahogany stage. He knocked over the wooden podium, sending the metallic microphone crashing onto the floor with a deafening screech of digital feedback that made guests cover their ears. "It is a deepfake," Derek screamed, his voice cracking with a hysterical pitch of pure panic. His hands thrashed wildly, gesturing frantically toward the blank projector screen above him. "It is a sophisticated, fabricated lie. My father is suffering from severe dementia. He is clinically insane. He hired technicians to manufacture this horrific video to destroy my professional reputation. Do not believe a single second of that footage. It is all a desperate illusion." But his thrashing denial fell upon a room that was utterly, terrifyingly unresponsive. The wealthy investment bankers, corporate executives, and dangerous men from the syndicate did not offer him a single nod of reassurance. They stared at him with expressions of profound disgust and predatory calculation. They had clearly heard the chilling rattle of the pills dropping down the sink. They had distinctly heard his cold confession perfectly recorded through the hidden microphone. They knew with absolute certainty they were looking at a man who slaughtered his own mother for financial gain. The realization that he had lost the room struck Derek like a physical blow. The color drained entirely from his sweating face. He spun around, his frantic eyes darting wildly across the opulent ballroom, desperately calculating his avenues of escape. The main entrance was blocked by a dense wall of furious guests. His only remaining option was the double doors leading into the catering kitchens at the far end of the venue. Derek lunged off the raised wooden stage, completely abandoning his sophisticated facade. He hit the carpeted floor with a heavy thud and immediately began sprinting frantically toward the back of the room. Rachel let out another shrill scream of pure terror. She hoisted the layered fabric of her glittering designer gown, her diamond necklace swinging violently against her chest as she desperately scrambled to follow her husband. She stumbled blindly in her towering stiletto heels, her perfectly styled hair falling in sweaty strands across her panicked face. "Wait." Rachel sobbed hysterically, her voice echoing shrilly over the chaotic din of the massive crowd. "Derek, do not leave me here. Wait for me." The 300 wealthy guests practically tripped over themselves to rapidly clear a path, violently recoiling from the fleeing couple as if they were contaminated with a highly contagious disease. Nobody extended a hand to help them. Nobody offered a comforting word of solace. They simply parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, empty corridor of absolute shame leading directly toward the kitchen service doors. I watched their desperate flight with a cold, structural calmness. I pushed my chair back from the VIP table and stood up. My posture was completely rigid, my spine aligned, radiating an undeniable heavy authority. I walked deliberately across the floor, my measured footsteps cutting clearly through the panicked crowd. I reached the fallen podium, bent down with smooth precision, and retrieved the metallic microphone. I tapped the heavy mesh head exactly twice. The sharp, thumping sounds boomed loudly through the towering speakers, commanding the complete attention of every person in the room. The chaotic shouts and furious murmurs died down, replaced by a tense silence that felt heavier than lead. I looked out over the vast sea of faces before finally speaking. My voice was deep, perfectly steady, and devoid of the frail, manufactured weakness I had projected for the past 5 months. "What you have just witnessed on that screen was not a digital fabrication," I announced smoothly, the truth ringing with absolute clarity. It was the brutal reality of my beautiful wife's final moments on this earth. But their murderous ambition did not conclude with her tragic passing. For 5 months, Derek and Rachel have been systematically poisoning me inside my home, serving me daily cups of herbal tea laced with heavily concentrated sedatives to mimic the symptoms of advanced cognitive decline. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my charcoal tuxedo and withdrew the thick toxicology report I had secured from the analytical laboratory. I held the damning medical document high in the air for the entire ballroom to clearly see. "This is a comprehensive toxicology screening conducted by an independent laboratory this very afternoon," I stated coldly, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a sharpened steel blade. "It definitively proves the tea they prepared for me contained a massive, highly lethal concentration of a heavy metal compound known as thallium. It is a tasteless, odorless poison explicitly designed to slowly destroy the central nervous system and trigger a sudden catastrophic cardiac arrest. They murdered Martha to accelerate the execution of a massive legal trust, and they were actively preparing to finish me off this week to secretly fund $15 million in offshore gambling debts." A collective gasp rippled violently through the stunned audience. The dangerous men from the syndicate exchanged dark, lethal glances, their hands subtly slipping beneath their tailored suit jackets. Derek had nearly reached the heavy double doors of the kitchen, his hand reaching out to push the brass handle, his desperate mind solely focused on securing his immediate escape into the labyrinth of service corridors. He shoved the right door open with all of his remaining physical strength, throwing his body weight forward into the perceived safety of the shadows. The heavy wooden door swung inward, but Derek did not manage to take a single step forward. He violently collided with a solid wall of dark tactical armor. The blinding beams of a dozen high-powered flashlights instantly cut through the dim lighting, illuminating his sweating, terrified face. A full tactical unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, heavily armed and wearing dark Kevlar vests boldly emblazoned with bright yellow lettering, completely blocked the entire kitchen threshold. They moved with silent precision, immediately pushing into the grand ballroom and forming an impenetrable, heavily fortified barricade across the only viable exit. Rachel slammed hard into Derek's back, letting out a breathless shriek as the imposing federal agents systematically raised their weapons, their faces obscured by dark tactical helmets and ballistic visors. From the absolute center of the federal formation, a familiar, sharply dressed figure stepped forward into the warm light of the crystal chandeliers. Gregory Barnes, my ruthless estate attorney, casually adjusted the lapels of his immaculate black suit, his predatory eyes locking directly onto my trembling son. Gregory held a thick official federal warrant securely in his right hand. I watched from the front of the stage, my face a flawless mask of cold, calculated victory. I lowered the metallic microphone and offered my son a dark, entirely merciless smile. The invisible trap we had meticulously constructed had finally snapped shut with bone-crushing force. There was absolutely no escape. The heavy silence of the grand ballroom shattered into absolute chaos the second the federal agents crossed the threshold. The heavily armed tactical unit moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. They did not shout orders or brandish their weapons indiscriminately at the terrified guests. Instead, they moved in a tight, focused formation, directly toward the stage, their heavy boots thudding in perfect unison against the polished wooden floor. The high society crowd scrambled violently out of their path, knocking over crystal champagne flutes and lavish floral arrangements in their desperate rush to avoid the advancing federal tide. Derek stood completely paralyzed on the edge of the stage. His initial instinct to run had entirely evaporated, completely, replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of his inescapable reality. He watched the dark uniforms approach with wide, unblinking eyes, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. Two massive federal agents reached the front of the stage and vaulted up the wooden steps with shocking speed. Before my son could even register their proximity, they seized him by the shoulders of his custom-tailored tuxedo and violently slammed him face first into the nearest silk-draped banquet table. The impact sent expensive silverware and fine china clattering loudly onto the floor. Derek let out a sharp, breathless gasp as the heavy weight of the agents pinned him firmly against the white silk tablecloth. His arms were aggressively wrenched behind his back. The distinct, cold, metallic ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly into place echoed sharply over the chaotic murmurs of the stunned audience. Derek Caldwell, the lead agent, announced, his voice a deep, booming baritone that easily dominated the massive room. "You are now officially under arrest by order of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are being formally charged with first-degree murder conspiracy to commit murder and federal wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The horrific magnitude of the charges washed over the lavish ballroom like a tidal wave of ice. First-degree murder. The whispered words rippled rapidly through the crowd of wealthy investment bankers and corporate executives. They stared at the man they had just been eagerly celebrating, their expressions twisting from initial confusion into profound, visceral revulsion. The carefully constructed, flawless facade Derek had spent years building was being aggressively dismantled piece by piece in front of his entire professional network. Suddenly, a piercing and hysterical shriek tore through the heavy atmosphere. Rachel had managed to scramble away from the tactical unit, blocking the kitchen doors, but her escape was incredibly short-lived. Two female federal agents swiftly intercepted her, grabbing her bare arms and spinning her around. Rachel fought them wildly, her layered designer gown tangling around her legs as she thrashed against their iron grip. "I did not do anything," Rachel screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. Her perfectly styled hair fell in messy, sweaty strands across her face, completely ruining her immaculate, aristocratic image. She twisted her neck frantically, locking her terrified eyes onto Derek, who was still pinned forcefully against the banquet table. "It was all his idea," she wailed, pointing a trembling finger directly at her own husband. "He forced me to do it. He told me he would leave me with absolutely nothing if I did not help him with the medication. He is a monster. He is a degenerate gambling addict. You have to believe me. I am a victim here. Her desperate, pathetic betrayal was instantaneous and absolute. The moment her own freedom was directly threatened, she eagerly threw the man she supposedly loved directly to the wolves. Derek turned his head slightly against the crushed silk tablecloth, staring at his screaming wife with an expression of sheer, shattered disbelief. The federal agents completely ignored her hysterical performance. They efficiently forced her arms behind her back, slapping a matching pair of steel handcuffs onto her delicate wrists. She continued to sob loudly, her fake tears completely replaced by the genuine, ugly weeping of a cornered criminal realizing her lavish life of stolen luxury was permanently over. As the agents secured the prisoners, Gregory Barnes stepped calmly onto the wooden stage. My veteran attorney moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a seasoned predator circling a captured prey. He smoothly retrieved the discarded metallic microphone from the floor, dusted off the mesh head, and turned to face the captivated, horrified audience. Gregory's sharp gaze slowly swept across the room, deliberately lingering on the dark, quiet table occupied by the dangerous men representing the underground syndicate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory announced, his deep voice projecting a cold, unwavering authority. "I apologize for the abrupt interruption of this evening's festivities. However, it is imperative to clarify the precise nature of the events unfolding before you. The $5 million wire transfer executed earlier today by Mr. Derek Caldwell was not a brilliant corporate investment. It was a highly orchestrated, carefully monitored federal sting operation." Gregory paused, letting the devastating truth fully sink into the minds of the audience. The specific account Mr. Caldwell accessed was a restricted federal honeypot. Gregory continued, his words striking like physical blows. By intentionally routing those funds to unverified offshore entities in a desperate attempt to cover his massive illegal gambling debts, he provided the Federal Bureau of Investigation with the exact digital blueprints of his illicit financial network. As of this exact moment, every single offshore account associated with that fraudulent transfer has been completely frozen and seized by international authorities. I watched the syndicate men at the adjacent table closely. Their cold, calculating eyes widened slightly in sudden, horrific realization. Their posture instantly shifted from relaxed arrogance to tense, dangerous panic. They realized Derek had not only failed to pay them their $15 million, but he had actively led a massive federal task force directly to their hidden financial infrastructure. They had lost their money, and their entire covert operation was now hopelessly compromised. Their gaze locked onto Derek, radiating an invisible, lethal promise of future violence. Gregory lowered the microphone, signaling the tactical unit to proceed. The lead agent hauled Derek roughly to his feet, gripping the back of his collar. They began to march him across the grand ballroom, forcing him to walk the long, humiliating path toward the main exit. The crowd parted silently, refusing to make eye contact with the disgraced murderer. As they forcefully dragged Derek past my VIP table, his legs suddenly gave out beneath him. The overwhelming terror of his situation completely broke his spirit. He fell heavily to his knees on the thick carpet, dragging the federal agents down slightly with his weight. He looked up at me, his face slick with genuine, terrified tears. The arrogant, untouchable investment banker was gone, completely replaced by a broken, sobbing coward. He realized that his entire life was now officially over, ruined forever. He opened his trembling mouth and begged me for a mercy he never gave Martha. "Dad, please, the syndicate will kill me in prison. You have to save me. I am your son." I looked down at the pathetic man kneeling on the thick carpet. He trembled violently, his custom tuxedo ruined by the reality of his arrest. The tears streaming down his face were not shed out of remorse for the mother he murdered, nor out of guilt for the pain he inflicted upon our family. They were the terrified tears of a cornered narcissist, realizing he was nothing more than prey. He begged me to save him, his voice cracking desperately, invoking the sacred family bond he had gleefully shattered 5 months ago. I stood over him, feeling a profound emptiness. There was no overwhelming surge of triumphant joy in my chest, nor any explosion of rage. I did not raise my voice to scream at him. I did not ball my hands to strike his face. He was not worth the exertion of my anger. The toxic fury that had sustained me through 5 months of acting like a frail victim had completely evaporated, leaving behind cold resolve. I saw him for what he was, a hollow shell, driven entirely by greed. The federal agents held him firmly in place. Gregory stood silently aside, watching the culmination of our meticulous planning. The entire grand ballroom held its collective breath, anticipating a dramatic, explosive confrontation. Instead, I bent my knees, lowering my rigid frame until my face was inches away from Derek's panicked features. He eagerly leaned forward, his eyes shining with a pathetic glimmer of false hope, foolishly believing a father's unconditional love would somehow override the cold facts of premeditated murder. I looked deeply into his eyes, searching for any lingering trace of the little boy I had once carried. There was absolutely nothing there. The void stared back. I let out a slow, measured breath, feeling the absolute finality of this moment. "I am just a clueless old man, Derek," I whispered softly, ensuring the chilling words reached only his ears. "I do not know who you are." The desperate hope instantly vanished from his pale face, replaced by uncomprehending horror. His jaw dropped open, but no sound emerged. He finally understood the absolute perfection of the trap. I had used his own arrogant words against him, the exact words he had spoken in his office when he assumed I was too frail and too deeply sedated to notice his lethal ambitions. I smoothly straightened my posture completely, breaking eye contact, and turned my back on the man who had once shared my last name. "No!" Derek suddenly screamed, the sound tearing from his throat with animalistic desperation. "Dad, please, do not walk away. You cannot leave me like this. They will kill me." I ignored his frantic cries entirely. I began to walk toward the main exit of the grand ballroom, my footsteps heavy, measured, and completely unbothered by the chaos unfolding directly behind me. The massive crowd of wealthy guests, corporate executives, and stunned socialites parted silently as I approached, their faces reflecting a mixture of profound shock and unspoken respect. Nobody dared to say a single word. The dangerous men from the syndicate remained frozen at their table, their cold eyes tracking my departure, fully realizing the breathtaking scope of the federal snare that had just decimated their illicit empire. I pushed through the revolving glass doors of the luxury hotel and stepped out into the cool night air. The rain had completely stopped, leaving the dark city streets slick and clean. The bright neon lights of the financial district reflected vividly in the small puddles on the pavement. For the first time in 5 grueling months, I inhaled a deep, unburdened breath. I did not hunch my shoulders. I did not drag my feet. I stood tall, the oppressive weight of my manufactured weakness permanently lifted from my tired bones. Behind me, the muffled sirens of approaching police cruisers began to wail in the distance, a fitting soundtrack to the ultimate destruction of Derek's stolen world. The legal aftermath was incredibly swift and absolutely merciless. The federal prosecutors did not offer any lenient plea deals or quiet settlements. The evidence we had meticulously gathered was simply too overwhelming, too completely undeniable to warrant any form of judicial mercy. The digital confession recorded by Martha's smart glasses, combined with the comprehensive toxicology reports of the poisoned tea and the highly documented financial fraud, formed an ironclad case. Derek and Rachel had anticipated using my massive family trust to hire the most aggressive, expensive defense attorneys in the country. They had fully expected to bury the legal system in endless litigation. However, because Gregory and I had expertly frozen and seized every single one of their financial assets hours before the gala, they were left entirely destitute. They were utterly stripped of the unearned wealth they had callously murdered to obtain. Without my money to fund a sophisticated defense, their high-priced legal representation evaporated overnight. They were completely abandoned by their wealthy social circle, immediately treated as toxic pariahs by the very people who had been toasting their success just days prior. The trial was brief, clinical, and devastating. The prosecution presented the horrific video of Martha's final moments directly to the jury. The absolute cruelty of Rachel pouring the life-saving medication down the kitchen sink, while Derek whispered his murderous intentions, sealed their fate within hours. The jury deliberated for less than a single afternoon. When the final verdict was read, there were no dramatic courtroom outbursts, only the heavy, satisfying strike of the judge's wooden gavel. Derek and Rachel were both handed consecutive life sentences in maximum security federal prison, entirely without the possibility of parole. They would spend the rest of their miserable lives locked inside concrete cells, permanently stripped of their designer clothes, their stolen luxury, and their arrogant freedom. The underground syndicate fared no better. The $5 million wire transfer Derek had executed into my isolated, monitored honeypot account provided the Federal Bureau of Investigation with the exact digital keys needed to instantly unlock the entire criminal network. The tactical units used the meticulously documented transaction logs to systematically track, freeze, and seize dozens of hidden offshore accounts. The dangerous men who had confidently attended the gala to collect their extortion money were aggressively hunted down and arrested within weeks. Their massive, violent empire was completely dismantled, their illegal assets permanently seized by the government, effectively neutralizing the immediate threat they posed. Now, sitting alone in the quiet warmth of my study, I look at the framed photograph of Martha resting on my mahogany desk. The heavy, suffocating darkness that had clouded my life for the past year has finally begun to recede slowly, replaced by a quiet, enduring peace. The house is silent, but it no longer feels entirely empty. I honored her beautiful memory in the only way that truly mattered. I protected the legacy we built together, ensuring the monsters who stole her faced the absolute maximum penalty for their crimes. I survived the darkest storm imaginable, emerging stronger and completely unburdened by the shadows of the past. The trap has closed, the board is cleared, and justice, cold and absolute, has finally been served. 6 months passed with the swift, unrelenting momentum of a world that had finally righted its axis. The oppressive winter had completely surrendered to a bright, vibrant spring, reflecting the profound shift within my own existence. I stood quietly beneath the brilliant morning sun, my head tilted back as I looked up at the sleek, towering glass facade of the newly expanded Chicago Medical Center. The crisp, cool wind gently rustled the lapels of my dark suit, but I felt absolutely no chill. I felt only a deep, radiating warmth anchoring my soul to the ground. Today was the culmination of everything I had fought to protect. A small, respectful crowd of hospital administrators, leading cardiovascular surgeons, and dedicated medical staff gathered around a polished marble podium near the main entrance. A wide silk ribbon of deep crimson stretched across the gleaming automatic doors. To my immediate right stood Gregory, my steadfast attorney, holding a leather folio containing the final trust documents. We had successfully liquidated the massive $40 million family fund, permanently removing it from the greedy, blood-stained reach of my disgraced son. Every single cent of that immense fortune had been meticulously redirected into this massive philanthropic endeavor. The hospital director stepped forward and adjusted the microphone. He spoke passionately about the countless lives this state-of-the-art facility would save, detailing the advanced surgical theaters and the groundbreaking research laboratories that were now fully operational. He spoke of the unparalleled generosity that made this ambitious vision a tangible reality. But as the applause respectfully rippled through the gathering, my attention was not focused on the accolades. My eyes were completely locked onto the heavy bronze plaque securely bolted into the polished granite wall beside the entrance. The Martha Caldwell Cardiology Wing. The golden letters gleamed perfectly in the morning light. I reached out and gently traced the engraved outline of my beautiful wife's name. A profound, overwhelming sense of completion washed through my entire being. Martha had suffered terribly in her final moments, betrayed by the very people she had nurtured and loved. Her failing heart had been callously ignored for the sake of a monstrous inheritance. Now her enduring name would forever be associated with healing, with vital medical intervention, and with the preservation of human life. I smiled softly, feeling a genuine expression of peace that I had not felt in over a year. The legacy we had built together was finally secure, untouchable by the corrupt hands of greed. I picked up the golden scissors handed to me by the director and sliced cleanly through the crimson ribbon. The crowd erupted into genuine, heartfelt applause. The wing was officially open. The dark shadow of Derek's terrible crime was permanently eclipsed by this monument of enduring light. After the brief reception, I politely declined Gregory's offer for a ride and chose to walk the 2 miles back to my estate. The physical exertion felt incredibly good. My legs, which I had forced to drag and shuffle for 5 agonizing months, moved with long, powerful, and deliberate strides. My spine remained perfectly straight. My breathing was deep and rhythmic, drawing in the clean, unpolluted air of the city. The physical weakness I had so carefully feigned was entirely gone, replaced by a robust, undeniable vitality that defied my age. I turned down my quiet, tree-lined street, the familiar silhouette of my large stone house coming into view. When I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped into the grand foyer, the immediate silence of the empty house greeted me. But it was no longer the suffocating, tense silence of a home harboring dangerous predators. It was a clean, honest, and profoundly comforting quiet. The toxic presence of Derek and Rachel had been completely eradicated from these walls, scrubbed away by the absolute finality of their federal convictions. I walked slowly through the spacious living room, letting my fingertips glide over the polished mahogany furniture. I moved toward the sunlit corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The hideous, drooping Boston fern that had served as the secret graveyard for my daily doses of toxic medication was completely gone. I had personally bagged the contaminated soil and thrown the heavy ceramic pot into the municipal dumpster months ago. In its place stood a vibrant, thriving white orchid, its delicate petals blooming beautifully in the natural light. It was Martha's favorite flower, a living testament to her enduring presence in this house. I continued into the kitchen, the very room where Derek had callously watched his mother draw her final breath. The horrific echoes of that day had been systematically replaced by the quiet, mundane rhythms of a restored life. I filled the copper kettle with fresh, filtered water and placed it onto the gas stove. I ignited the burner, watching the bright blue flame flare to life. I opened the wooden pantry and retrieved a simple, unbranded box of chamomile tea. I did not need to inspect the contents. I did not need to secretly pour the liquid into the roots of a dying houseplant. The shrill whistle of the kettle broke the serene silence. I poured the boiling water into a porcelain mug, watching the golden liquid steep perfectly. I picked up the warm mug and took a long, slow sip. It tasted pure, soothing, and absolutely safe. I carried my tea into the master study, sitting down in my heavy leather armchair. I looked out the window at the manicured back lawn, feeling the sharp, unclouded clarity of my own mind. My cognitive functions were razor-sharp. My body was healthy, strong, and completely devoid of the heavy metal poisons that had nearly claimed my life. I had stared directly into the terrifying abyss of my own family's betrayal, and I had emerged entirely victorious. The board was not just cleared, it was completely rebuilt on my own unyielding terms. I closed my eyes, letting the warm sunlight wash over my face. I could almost feel Martha's gentle hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. Her spirit, long restless from the brutal injustice of her passing, was finally at peace. The monsters were locked away in concrete cages, and her beautiful name was permanently carved in bronze, saving lives every single day. The war was officially over, and the enduring silence of my home was the ultimate sound of victory. The hardest lesson a parent can learn is that the unconditional love we offer our children is not always reciprocated. We spend our lives building a legacy to protect them, only to realize that sometimes we are the ones who need protection from our own flesh and blood. Trust is a beautiful thing, but blind trust is a dangerous vulnerability. Never ignore your intuition, and never let family ties blind you to the truth of someone's actions. True wealth isn't the money you leave behind. It is the integrity, honor, and dignity with which you choose to live your life. Have you ever experienced a shocking betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to fight back? Share your story in the comments below. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next life-changing story.